This time, we have this little failure. 7 years ago, people received ultra-rare talents, but he was the loser without any talent. When he gave up and was about to cause a catastrophe, he unbelievably received the system of explosive growth. In other words, he completes missions and grows 10 times faster than other people. But before all of this began, the world had been invaded by monsters 30 years ago. They came out of the portals, plunging the world into pure chaos. But in the present day, a bottle of liquor is thrown to the ground as someone complains about yet another damned portal. The same person who discarded the bottle kicks a metal railing and rants that both hunters and portals could go to hell, as he doesn't care anymore due to this filthy, miserable world. This man with a bruised face and tears streaming down in a mix of rage and sorrow yells, questioning what he did to deserve such suffering. He's interrupted by a guard warning him to step down from the railing because it's dangerous. But the man only shouts back, asking why he should listen, and whether he doesn't even have the right to die if he wants to. While the guards try to calm him down and coax him to come down, it's no use. He insists they leave him alone, shouting that they couldn't possibly understand his pain after everything he's been through. 3 hours earlier, in a massive building belonging to the Viction Guild, the same young man was yelling, questioning if he'd really been fired. He demanded to know if they were aware of how much he dedicated himself to the guild. In front of him, a man sitting behind a desk asks what he's actually accomplished for the guild. He was practically nothing more than a pack mule, hired 7 years ago for appearing diligent, but in all that time, he hasn't achieved anything, hasn't advanced beyond rank D, and now he's limping and crippled. Our protagonist tries to argue, but the guild leader coldly tells him to stop trying and just leave, assuring him that compensation will be calculated. However, the protagonist protests, saying he could find a way to heal his injured leg and continue working. The discussion is interrupted by a muscular man with blonde hair and tattoos who sneers at him, asking if he truly doesn't understand plain language, pointing out that the boss already told him he's fired. The protagonist recognizes the man as Lee Youngjin and demands to know how he can treat a senior this way. But Youngjin merely mocks him, asking why he's acting like an old man, calling it pathetic. Youngjin advises him to take the damn severance package and buy himself some snacks like the pathetic rank D hunter he is. Finally, he calls the protagonist by name Lee Taejin. Enraged, Lee Taejin grabs Youngjin's tank top, accusing him of being the reason his leg was injured due to Youngjin's recklessness during an attack. Youngjin simply scoffs and asks when Taejin ever asked to be saved. He coldly states that Taejin was just a pack mule and had no business being on the front lines. He blames Taejin for not knowing his place and sarcastically questions how a loser like him could have an S-rank ability. Referring to Taejin's skill, explosive growth, he mocks it as a bad joke, suggesting that Taejin's growth plates must be sealed. Unable to stand the insult, Taejin clenches his fist and tries to punch Youngjin, but his strike is effortlessly blocked by a small barrier that forms around Youngjin's hand. Youngjin warns Taejin to stay in his place before delivering a direct punch to his stomach, causing Taejin to spit out and fall to the ground. Grabbing Taejin by the collar, Youngjin tells him he's tired of Taejin acting superior just because he started a few years earlier, and says this is the perfect opportunity to see how tough Taejin really is. Youngjin begins punching him repeatedly in the face. In the background, the guild leader accuses Taejin of several crimes, a mere rank D challenging a rank C, disrespecting his superior, and worst of all, the crime of being Lee Taejin. Youngjin drops the battered Taejin to the ground, leaving him sprawled out. An envelope of money falls beside him as the leader thanks Taejin for driving his ass around for all those years, but informs him they'll never see each other again. Taejin can only cry as the scene shifts to nighttime. Now, our protagonist exits a small store after purchasing a drink and heads to the bridge from the beginning of the story. He takes a sip, remarks on the drink's good taste, and then holds the envelope, bitterly questioning how, after 7 long years of work, all he has to show for it is a measly bundle of money. Feeling he has nothing left to hold on to in this world, he climbs onto the railing. However, as soon as he does, a system window appears, warning that his life is in danger and asking him to step back. Taejin scoffs, complaining that only now the damn system cares about him. He sarcastically asks the cursed status window if it knows how much he's suffered in the past 7 years. He punches the window, blaming everything on the useless skill he received. He keeps hitting it, lamenting that the skill doesn't boost any of his stats. In response to his aggression, the status window notifies him that it is going on strike. Taejin bursts into laughter, mocking the system and telling it to go ahead since it's useless anyway. He orders it to disappear and throws the bottle at it, shattering the glass. Taejin begins brooding over his past, shouting that if the system had explained the skill properly from the beginning, none of this would have happened. He screams into the night, begging God to hear him, that this nightmare wouldn't have happened and he wouldn't have such a miserable life. The status window begins glitching, flickering with visual distortions, before finally notifying Taejin that his complaints have been received. We return to the present. Taejin argues with the authorities, urging him to step away from the edge, but as he shouts that they don't understand his suffering, he slips and falls. Looking up at the guards as he plummets, he wonders if this is really how it all ends. Surprisingly, he finds it almost comforting, thinking it might be for the best since there's no point in living in such a cruel world. But as he falls, the status window reappears, notifying him that the administrator has received his complaint and he will temporarily be transported to the administrator's server. Confused, Taejin glances down, seeing a massive surge of energy envelop him. Multiple windows appear, announcing an update to the status system. Finally, the status window turns golden, notifying him that the update is complete. Suddenly, Taejin wakes up to sunlight on his face and the sound of birds chirping. He places a hand on his head, complaining about the pain and wondering what kind of nonsense he had gotten into by drinking alone like an idiot the previous night. He promises himself himself that if he ever drinks again, he'll imitate a dog as punishment. But in a sudden flash of memory, he questions whether he had actually fallen the previous night and recalls seeing something about a status window update. However, he dismisses the idea, thinking it was just his imagination running wild. In any case, he's now an unemployed man, pondering what the hell he's going to do to make a living. He wonders if he should take up day labor, considering that joining another guild as a hunter will be nearly impossible for a while. As he mulls over his options, he's interrupted by a small hologram of a blonde, pointy-eared girl who asks if he's satisfied with the latest status window update. Naturally, Taejin is startled by the sudden appearance, stumbling backward and yelling, asking who she is. With an air of nonchalance, she introduces herself as Miri from the status window management department. Taejin questions whether any of this is real, asking if what happened the previous night wasn't just a dream. Miri quickly confirms that it was indeed real. She informs him that they reviewed his complaint about explosive growth and discovered, after an investigation, that his status window had been outdated, which caused it to malfunction. This revelation leaves Taejin stunned, and the lighthearted laugh at the end of her statement doesn't help. He demands to know how such a thing could happen. Miri explains that she can't disclose the reasons for security purposes, but assures him that the issue has been resolved. His status window is now fully functional, and he'll start evolving as intended. However, instead of feeling relieved, Taejin grows furious. He turns to her, shouting that all his efforts were in vain. Every bit of hard work and training over the years had been wasted because of a malfunctioning status window. Startled, Miri tries to calm him as he grabs her by the shoulders, his face contorted with rage. He asks if she wants to die for what she's done, demanding to know how she plans to compensate him for the 7 lost years. Terrified, Miri pleads for him to relax and assures him that she has restored all the attributes he should have had and even healed his injuries. Taejin lets go of her and examines his leg, moving it around. He realizes he no longer feels any pain, marveling that it's in perfect condition. He asks how she managed it. Miri offers to explain, but first mentions that for explosive growth to activate, a special trigger is required. She begins proposing a challenge to him. The scene shifts to the middle of the city, where green energy swirls in the sky. From it, tentacles emerge, followed by a massive creature spewing acid. The sight causes the crowd to scream, with people calling for the containment team. The creature, resembling a beholder with multiple faces, descends to the ground. In the midst of the panicking crowd, Taejin exclaims in disbelief, questioning if Miri is seriously sending him to his death. He insists he has no chance against such a monster, but Miri encourages him, expressing her faith in his abilities and reassuring him, almost too casually, that at worst, he'll just die. While Miri flashes him a thumbs up, Taejin stares at the creature, which opens up like a flower, releasing venomous spores. Such a creature would typically require at least a B-rank hunter, and even an experienced containment team would struggle against it. Taejin, hesitant, asks if defeating the monster would truly activate explosive growth as Miri claimed. She confidently confirms it. Still conflicted, he debates whether to trust her. Her sudden appearance and her absurd suggestion leave him incredulous. He concludes that his life is already a chain of unfortunate events, and running away wouldn't change a thing. With nothing to lose, he decides to face it head-on, albeit hesitantly. He begins running toward the creature, passing by soldiers who try to stop him, warning him of the danger. Just as he closes in, the creature sprays acid on his arm. Taejin retaliates, delivering a direct kick that obliterates one of the creature's appendages. Instantly, a mission notification appears. A small step forward has been completed. The skill Fearless experience activates along with explosive growth. Taejin, astonished, questions how a single blow could damage a creature of this caliber. As he wonders about the new windows appearing before him, another notification pops up, stating that his stats are improving significantly. We see his status window. He's still a rank D. Behind him, Miri asks how it feels to use explosive growth for the first time. Taejin, wide-eyed, can only say that it's absurdly overpowered. Miri warns him not to celebrate yet. She explains that the skill's true potential is just beginning, and to unlock it, he'll need to defeat all the monsters. As she speaks, Taejin charges toward another spore, killing it in a single blow. Again, explosive growth activates, boosting his attributes further. He marvels at how each kill significantly strengthens him, fueling his excitement to take down more. He quickly eliminates the 5 remaining spores, gaining even more power. Finally, he leaps toward the venomous spore, thinking that at this rate, he could reach B-rank status within a week, maybe even surpass A rank. With a grin, he plunges into the spore's mouth, preparing a punch. The scene cuts to a restored cityscape, where soldiers clean up the creature's remains. Onlookers gather, speculating whether the containment team has arrived. Among the crowd is Youngjin, who complains about missing the action. One of his companions points out Taejin rummaging through the creature's remains. They wonder why a loser like him is there and speculate if he's eaten something strange, noting his oddly smug expression. Youngjin approaches with his group, calling out to Taejin and Miri. Youngjin taunts Taejin, asking if he didn't understand the hint they gave him earlier. He calls him pathetic and asserts that he'll never amount to anything more than a loser. Taejin wonders internally if they're here to hunt as well. A status window appears before Taejin, prompting a sly smile. With heavy sarcasm, he remarks on how his injured leg delayed him, ironically thanking Youngjin for their kindness. Before the situation escalates, a soldier from the containment team interrupts, thanking Taejin for his help and acknowledging that the situation would have been far more dangerous without him. Taejin's smile turns almost psychotic as he contemplates how everything is falling into place for him. Deciding to seize the moment, he humbly tells the soldier that it was nothing and simply his duty as a hunter. This leaves Youngjin and his group visibly irritated and confused. The soldier continues praising Taejin, marveling at his ability to handle so many spores at once. She's interrupted by Youngjin, who incredulously asks if she's saying Taejin defeated the entire monster alone. She confirms, questioning if there's an issue. Youngjin, still in disbelief, barely has time to process this when Taejin dismissively tells him not to bother the public officials. Grabbing Youngjin and his group, Taejin drags them away, promising to explain everything later. We move forward to a scene where the characters are inside a small building under construction. destruction. The blonde guy taunts the protagonist, demanding to know if he really defeated that creature on his own. He continues mocking, pointing out that the protagonist is just a rank D, questioning if he seriously believes such a feat is possible, and ordering him to answer. The protagonist remains silent, recalling an earlier moment when the status window informed him that he had encountered some very rude adventurers. It then gave him a mission to teach him a lesson in exchange for an A-rank skill. This memory had caused him to grin like a psychopath earlier, as he thought about the opportunity to gain a skill just by beating up these idiots. For him, it was like killing two birds with one stone. In the present, the protagonist suddenly drops to his knees on the floor, leaving Mary looking like a complete fool. Taejin, however, apologizes and asks if they wouldn't mind if he gave him a good beating. They stare at him in confusion, while Taejin casually explains that they might be confused, but since he's new to this sort of thing, he's not very good at sugarcoating his words. He asks one last time if they'd mind receiving a lesson. Youngjin's group is outraged. One of them, a massive bald guy, steps forward and questions if Taejin has lost his mind due to the heat, or if this is some sort of joke. He tells Taejin to stop spouting nonsense and reminds him that in this world, people who commit crimes must be punished. He punctuates this statement by striking Taejin's head, trying to push him downward. The protagonist calmly asks if he's serious about what he just said. Then he announces that since the bald man thinks this way, he'll be the one to punish him and that he should take it like he deserves. The bald man starts to question Taejin's statement, but before he can fully speak, Taejin lands a punch straight to his face. The impact is so devastating that it metaphorically restarts his Windows system, leaving the man sprawled on the ground. The rest of the group is left stunned, questioning if they're seeing things correctly, as the bald guy has collapsed all by himself. While they're still shocked, Taejin tells them to come at him one by one. Since they dared to intimidate a superior, he wants to see if they can handle even a single flick to the forehead. The group thinks he's delusional to believe they'd fall to such a ridiculous attack. They question why he seems so confident, asking if he hasn't already taken enough of a beating. As they approach, Taejin, who is preparing a flick, delivers it with such force to the bald guy's head that his face deforms and his nose sprays blood like ketchup. Then Taejin systematically takes down the rest of the group one flick at a time, breaking shields, disarming weapons, and knocking out several members. By the end, only Youngjin is left standing, furious and confused, asking if this is some kind of joke, that his team could fall to an attack like that. Taejin responds that it's no joke. He calls Youngjin by his name, his eyes glowing red, and asks if he still thinks this is funny. Youngjin is visibly disoriented, and Taejin explains that while he might let the others go, Youngjin specifically isn't going to escape. He states that a mere flick to the forehead isn't enough for someone like him and advises him to prepare himself. Youngjin, now enraged, declares that he's going to kill Taejin. He conjures ice spikes and mocks Taejin, stating that it seems like he's unlocked some sort of physical skill, but warns him not to get cocky over a single ability. Taejin, unfazed, looks at him and casually asks when he learned the ice missile skill. Right at that moment, the status window pops up, announcing that Taejin has acquired a new skill. Taejin grins and thanks the status window for its perfect timing. Raising his hand to the sky, he conjures a massive fireball and a Dragon Ball style display of power. Taejin smirks at Youngjin, informing him that he also has a new skill and is eager to test it out. This is no ordinary fireball. It's an A-rank fireball, significantly stronger than a standard fireball and capable of reducing healing effects upon impact. Taejin asks Youngjin what he thinks of it, as the blonde guy stares in stunned disbelief. His ice spikes melt under the fireball's intense heat, and he wonders if it's even a real fireball. Taejin admits that he just learned the skill and isn't sure if he can fully control its power yet, mockingly advising Youngjin to be careful before launching it at him. Youngjin began to be consumed by the enormous flaming ball, his thoughts overwhelmed by how unbearably hot it was. In the end, a massive explosion shook the area, creating a fissure in the building and leaving Youngjin sprawled on the ground. His body was dried out, his clothes scorched, and his hair split in half and burned to a crisp. The blonde guy, barely conscious, wonders what just happened and how he's still alive. Our protagonist mocks him for wetting his pants, adding that even in desperation, he shouldn't collapse to the ground in such a pitiful manner. Taejin walks closer to him and warns him to stop picking on guild members, instructing him to be nice from now on. Youngjin apologizes profusely, admitting that he understands. He calls Taejin senior and promises never to bully anyone again. However, our protagonist smirks and reminds him that there's still one flick left to deliver. Placing his hand close to the blonde guy's forehead, he smiles mischievously, ready to finish what he started. Mari looks at our protagonist collapsed near the bed and tells him to wake up, saying it's time for him to head to the dungeon. She explains that after using too much power, he passed out from exhaustion and remained immobile for 3 days. She wonders aloud if he'll be able to overcome this crisis, breaking the fourth wall and looking at us, while Taejin tells her to shut up. He groans about being in pain, running a fever, and asks if she could just keep quiet. She realizes he's finally awake, and he explains that he pushed his mana to the limit, which is what happens when he's reckless. He got too excited about becoming strong so quickly, but now he needs to focus on improving his mana. Miri asks if he really needs that, considering his incredible growth so far. He confirms that it's precisely because of that growth that he needs to increase his mana. All his stats have improved except his mana, and if he continues hunting without addressing this, he'll faint again. He also points out that his fireball skill consumes twice as much mana, so either way, he has to boost his mana. Mary nods, saying she understands, and asks if there's a way to increase just mana. He responds that there's a perfect place for that, just as the status window pops up, notifying him that 8 hours and 30 minutes remain until his recovery. We fast forward to the next day, where an enormous tower reaching up to the sky comes into view. Its name is Training Tower. Taejin approaches it with Mary, who asks him what the giant tower is. He explains that it's the best place to train mana quickly, and that it's a beginner's dungeon. She looks puzzled and asks why. If it's so well known and effective, they're the only ones there. He explains that in the past, it was a popular spot, but it's fallen out of fashion nowadays. As they talk, an old man approaches, calling out to his grandmother mother, asking if she's really returned. This confuses our protagonist, who wonders what's going on with him. Taejin approaches and states that he wants to do the tower's training mission, but the old man mishears and says something about not eating fast food, directing it to his grandmother. Our protagonist clarifies that he wants to do the mission and isn't asking for fast food. The old man asks if he's really there to challenge the tower's mission, then tells him to follow along, offering to guide them through the tower. Miri comments nervously about how uneasy this makes her, but Taejin assures her that he's prepared. The old man begins explaining the tower, but is interrupted by our protagonist, who explains that the tower is divided into 10 stages, and upon completing them all, the mission is cleared. He elaborates that the first stage involves defeating a group of goblins. The old man confirms this, and Miri remarks that Taejin seems to know a lot about the tower. Taejin responds that no one knows tower strategies better than he does, as he couldn't physically participate in expeditions, but studied them extensively on YouTube and memorized all the strategies he saw. He concludes by saying that the beginner's dungeon will be a piece of cake for him. Miri congratulates him, and the story notes that Taejin is indeed an excellent theoretical learner. The old man asks what he said, but Taejin brushes it off, pretending he was just talking to himself. Shortly after, they find themselves inside the tower, where the old man tells them to begin the first test, striking the ground with his staff and summoning the monsters. As Miri comments that 10 goblins should be nothing for Taejin, 3 small goblins approach. However, behind them, an enormous group of ogres emerges. Taejin, confused, wonders if it's bulking season. He tries asking the old man why the goblins look like ogres, but the old man simply mutters something about kimchi soup. Frustrated, Taejin calls the old man Sanao. Without delay, the massive group of ogres charges at them. Miri asks Taejin what he's going to do about the approaching monsters. Clenching his fist, Taejin gathers his fireball magic and hurls it at the group, setting them ablaze while shouting that he'll crush them. As he celebrates, watching the monsters burn, Miri warns him that there are still enemies left and tells him to be careful. An ogre sneaks up behind him, and it's too late to defend himself as it lands a direct blow. Fortunately, he blocks it and counters by using the staff for leverage, launching himself into the air and landing a direct kick to the ogre's face, challenging it to show what it's got. With just one kick, the ogre collapses. The status window pops up, notifying him that the first stage has been cleared perfectly, and that, thanks to explosive growth, his experience has increased significantly. The old man laughs and congratulates Taejin on clearing the first floor so quickly, commenting that it looked too easy. Taejin, trying to suppress his rage, says it wasn't easy at all and was much harder than he expected. The old man ignores him and instructs them to proceed to the next stage, further infuriating Taejin, who feels an increasing urge to attack the old man. From that point, our protagonist explains that the dungeon was completely different from what he had anticipated, with monsters far stronger than usual, overwhelming numbers, and absurdly higher levels of physical and mental difficulty. He finally understood why no one came here anymore, not because they almost died at the start, but because this place was utterly impossible to clear for beginners. It was hell itself. We see our protagonist going through numerous test stages, and in the end, as he screams for mercy, Miri calls out to him. He kneels at the final stage of the tower, facing an enormous creature. In front of him stands the final boss, a massive 3-headed dog with golden chains around its neck and reddish fur. This is the Hellhound, level 90, rank S. Our protagonist thinks back to the forest, where he once thought of hellhounds as merely mean dogs. But this was on an entirely different level than anything he'd encountered before. He mutters that they should just give up on the reward already, admitting he couldn't defeat this thing even if he died and came back to life. Worse still, he's out of mana. However, a hidden mission suddenly appears, instructing him to heal the senile NPC. It explains that the NPC is causing disorder in the dungeon, and restoring his health would bring the dungeon back under control. Our protagonist wonders how he hadn't thought of this earlier, and recalls that the entire tower was constructed using the old man's mana. Since the old man can't control his own mana, the monsters are running rampant. If he could just restore the old man to normal, he could complete the dungeon. Miri asks if he's come up with a plan, and he confirms he has, though he's not sure it'll work. He starts running toward the old man while recalling something he heard before. When a powerful mage loses control of their mana, they lose their mind due to an overload of magical energy. At that point, they can barely think. The old man's mind is like a massive tangle of mana threads. Our protagonist rushes behind the old man while Miri shouts, asking what he's doing. Grabbing the old man's head, he prepares for action. In a swift motion, he starts massaging the old man's head, relaxing him into nirvana. Our protagonist thinks that at first glance, this might just look like a massage, but in reality, he's redirecting the scattered mana back into its proper pattern in the old man's mind. He assures himself that somehow, he'll fix this and restore the mana's flow. However, Miri interrupts, shouting for him to be careful as a massive pink fireball heads their way. Desperate, he begs the old man to snap out of it while accelerating his movements. The fireball strikes, creating a huge explosion that bursts out of the tower. Yet our protagonist isn't hit directly. A voice speaks, remarking that the old man's body seems to have caused a lot of trouble, acknowledging all that has happened and finally calling him Young One with a chuckle. We then see that the frail old man has transformed into a muscular figure, and his staff has become enormous. Our protagonist asks who he is now. The old man replies that it has been a long time since his mind was so clear. Before he finishes speaking, the massive hellhound lunges to attack. With a single motion, the old man not only tears off a chunk of the hellhound, but also destroys the top of the tower, Finally, he thanks our protagonist, calling him a benefactor and saying that if he has any wish, he need only say the word. The status window appears, notifying that the hidden mission has been completed and a reward has been granted. We move forward a bit to the old man doing squats with the staff on his back. Reaching the 100th, he throws the staff against the ground, breaking the floor while saying that high-intensity training is preparing for moments of intense mana usage. He then starts showing off bodybuilding poses, claiming that this is precisely what made him an archmage. He is the archmage Elkeroid who asks our protagonist if he can feel the mana radiating from his muscles, telling him to touch them if he wants to. Our protagonist refuses, saying he did need to, but the old man says that this type of power is not unnecessary and adds that he hasn't heard what he wanted yet and that anything is valid. Taejin informs him that he has little mana and hopes that the archmage can increase it. His limit is 200. Elkeroid says it wouldn't be difficult for him, talking about the body mana technique, mana accumulation technique. He punches the poor guy directly in the stomach, and at that moment, the protagonist starts screaming with light coming out of his eyes and mouth. The status window informs that his mana has been increased by 300, now totaling 500 points. He starts coughing, complaining that he almost died from that. The old man informs him that from what he sees, the problem is not his mana, but his use of the fireball, as he uses too much mana to cast it. Even though the fireball is a basic ability, this is far beyond that, and it's consuming a lot of mana. But he reassures Taejin that he shouldn't worry, as he would help him recreate the fireball. We move forward a little in time outside of this tower, and we're in a building in the middle of the city. We hear someone calling for Taejin, a red-haired girl named Lee Senao, a rank hunter from the Myth Guild. Miri, impressed, asks if the protagonist knows the girl, and he replies that she is just an old friend from the hunter training institution. Miri is even more impressed, asking if he really has friends and even a friend. This leaves him irritated, and he questions whether he really looks that miserable in her eyes. She simply asks why she called him. Taejin confirms that he called her to test the new fireball technique he learned from the old man and says that the guild's scene is part of Myth has the largest training center in the country. He adds that the old fireball could easily destroy a building, but the current one is even more dangerous, so he needs a safe area to use it. Cian understands and says that he has more connections than she expected. She approaches, asking what he was saying, but he just says that he didn't say anything, nervously laughing. We move forward to inside the location, with Cian asking how he has been since they hadn't seen each other in a long time. He says he's just been fulfilling his duties as a hunter. She suddenly gets closer, asking if that was true, and he asks if there's something on his face that made her get so close. She denies it and says she just wanted to see how much he's changed. Cian says that he always needed her help, but suddenly he seems more confident. This is strange, but another person had also requested to use the training center. She confirms and says that he would be surprised to see who it is. As she clicks to open the door, she notices they already arrived. The protagonist is surprised, realizing it's Choi Jin-hyuk, a rank hunter and member of the Bikshin Guild. The two stare at each other, with the protagonist surprised and Choi looking very angry. Cian is between them and asks why there's tension between them, since they hadn't seen each other in a year. We move forward a little with her explaining that the location is a virtual space made from the user's mana, and the power of the training monster depends on the amount of mana used. She channels mana into her hand and creates a small, ugly rat that even the devil would pity, but she calls it cute while asking if he understood. Our protagonist wonders if this thing was really supposed to be cute, while Cian says she's going to grab some drinks, leaving them alone. Taejin stares at her leaving, and behind him, Jin-hyuk stares at him. The protagonist extends his hands, saying that in this place he could create any monster he wanted with mana. He ends up forming a huge ogre to test it, noticing that it worked. In an instant, he sets a series of attacks, splitting the ogre in half, saying that it wasn't even worth the warm-up. While stretching, Jin-hyuk asks if it was him and tells him not to try to act innocent. He asks if he's the one who wiped out the guild's rookies, calling him an idiot. He says that at first he didn't want to believe it, but now seeing him kill an ogre, he realizes it's true, asking if he had unlocked some new power or something like that. Questioning what he is doing now that he is strong, beating his family members who ate from the same plate. Our protagonist stares at him, remembering that Jin-hyuk is one of the few friends he could truly rely on at the hunter training institution. But when Jin-hyuk joined Bikshin, he climbed the ranks and began changing into the person he is now, and they are no longer friends. The protagonist has a very ugly and arrogant look on his face, saying that it was him who did that and asking what Jin-hyuk would do about it, since it was him who beat up the rookies for messing with him first. He steps closer and asks what Jin-hyuk did, besides just watching as he was beaten to a pulp by them, every word making Jin-hyuk angrier. Taejin finishes by saying that he should have stepped in and defeated them with Youngjin. Jin-hyuk loses his patience and grabs the collar of our protagonist, warning him that he has a lot of nerve. But the protagonist interrupts him, saying that he's being strangled and finding it hard to breathe, and since he feels threatened, this would be self-defense. We see Cian entering, carrying a bag and informing them that she brought drinks for him. She is surprised and asks what they were doing, seeing Taejin and Jin-hyuk fighting. Jin-hyuk forces the protagonist to lower himself with a thrust while asking for a break, but the protagonist warns that there will be no rest, while he is surprised by a kick from the protagonist. Jin-hyuk barely manages to defend himself, but he admits that Taejin has gotten stronger and that he will now take it seriously. But our protagonist just mocks him, saying that he should have done that from the start, making Jin-hyuk even more irritated, thinking about when this idiot became so good at provoking. He spins his spear and names his technique, releasing yellow thunderbolts. Bikshin spear technique, first form, Spear of Thunder, surrounding the spears with yellow energy. Cian shouts, asking if Jin-hyuk has lost his mind, pulling out the thunder spear in the training center. Our protagonist, as he already knew Jin-hyuk would use this technique, with Miri by his side, surprised and scared, while the protagonist warns that he's going all out as well. Cian and Miri are shocked as he prepares himself, and the crazy guy simply releases a blue fire Kamehameha towards Jin-hyuk. This is the fireball of the rank as archmage, which also applies a healing reduction on the target, and it was learned from Elkeroid. destroyed. It leaves Jin Hyuk stunned, wondering if this is really a beam of pure energy. Jin Hyuk complains about the amount of magical power and says he wouldn't be able to block it, but suddenly a figure stepped in front of him, drawing a sword and cutting the energy in half, dissipating it completely, leaving everyone stunned. Our protagonist asks who he is, and Sien shouts that it's the vice president of the Myth Guild, Cha Soo-hyun, a rank S hunter. Soo-hyun states that this fireball isn't ordinary and warns that using such a powerful skill on a teammate could have caused a serious accident. Our protagonist simply says that he's a bit out of energy because this was his first time using it. Jin Hyuk thinks that, although it was an unexpected situation, it turned out well, and the best part is that Taejun was in trouble. Finally, with a terrifying aura, Soo-hyun stares at our protagonist and calls him. After approaching with a smile, he asks if our protagonist would like to join his guild, while shaking his hand. Jin Hyuk is indignant, thinking that the vice president of the Myth Guild, one of the few rank as hunters in the country, is offering a proposal to Taejun. Soo-hyun states that he had never encountered a fireball with such power before, and someone who takes basic skills to the maximum would be a great asset to their guild. He asks once more if Taejun would like to join them. Our protagonist smiles while thinking that to receive a proposal out of nowhere, he must have been recognized, and Myth is one of the 4 largest guilds in Korea. The 4 guilds are Hongnik, Myth, Longwa, and Cheongyun. If he joined, it would be a huge benefit. Taejun speaks aloud to the vice president, who listens, saying that a hunter must consistently train to surpass their limits. Soo-hyun questions this training, and our protagonist states that he promised to duel a colleague to test his limits, while Jin Hyuk denies, asking when he promised to duel. But he is interrupted by our protagonist, who says that during his training with hunter Jin Hyuk, he realized that Jin Hyuk is a mountain he still cannot surpass, and because of this, he couldn't join the guild since there are still many mountains to overcome before that. Jin Hyuk claims he's crazy and tries to warn about the fight, but the vice president simply starts laughing, saying that nothing is more essential than training for a hunter, and that he liked Taejun's spirit. He finishes by asking what his name and rank are. The protagonist states that he is a rank D hunter, and his name is Lee Taejun. Soo-hyun says that a talent like him being rank D is a huge waste, and finishes by saying he will make an effort for him. We move forward a bit in time with the protagonist explaining that he received a letter of recommendation from Soo-hyun to participate in the rank B evaluation in a month. At first he was hesitant, but the higher a hunter's rank, the higher the level of dungeon they can enter. Because of that, he wouldn't be losing out, so he decided to take the test to become rank B. Now a month later, we are at the Hunter Test Center, and our protagonist is impressed by the unique atmosphere of the place. Beside him, Miri comments that Soo-hyun must really like him since he gave him a recommendation letter so quickly. Our protagonist boasts, saying that talent recognizes talent and no one could compare to him. Miri asks the question everyone is wondering: why didn't he join the Myth Guild, since they were offering so much support? He replies that logically it's because of the money, as adventurers affiliated with guilds have to share part of their expedition and raid profits with the guild. Also, the rewards aren't that great, and his schedule would be packed. He'd work like a good dog, only to be discarded when he get injured. He ends by saying he just wanted money and nothing more. While smiling like a psychopath, someone calls his name, making him turn his face around with only part of his body devilishly twisted. He notices it's a girl with silver hair wearing a cat ear headband, asking if he was also going to take the test. This is Yu Se-rin, a rank C member of the Cheongyun Guild. She extends her hand and he shakes it, asking if she knows him. She confirms, saying that rumors had already spread, thinking about how Soo-hyun is completely determined to bring him into his guild. But she gives a mischievous smile as she says she heard he was such a talent that even the vice president of the Myth Guild was after him and had been eagerly watching over him. Our protagonist confirms, thinking that he was talking unnecessarily. Both are interrupted by a man who says he came to see what was going on, but ended up preparing only with a mediocre man, referring to our protagonist, saying this was to show that nothing good comes from a hyped-up banquet. This is Han Jian, rank C, from the Whoring Guild. He introduces himself and says it's a pleasure to meet them, stating that he is destined to be the greatest hunter of this era. While our protagonist thinks that he's crazy, a voice echoes it's the announcer welcoming the participants and stating that they would begin the 30-second rank B evaluation test. All the hunters present turn their attention to the woman on stage, and she continues, announcing that she will introduce the hunter, who will be their mentor during this time, rank a hunter Choi Jin Hyuk from the Bikshin Guild. Our protagonist is impressed while Jin Hyuk speaks into the microphone, saying it's good to see all of them. He warns that before the tests, you will briefly explain the procedures to them. The test will take place in a dungeon prepared by them, and each of the 8 participants will be grouped into pairs to face the dungeon together. This dungeon has 4 entrances labeled A, B, C, and D. The first pair to reach the end will face the boss with him directly, and even if they get seriously injured, a team will be ready to help. He ends by warning them about a scoring system that will be in effect and that they must keep it in mind. After informing everyone, they would begin the test. If anyone's name was called, they must step forward, take the streaming equipment, and then go to the portal. Finally, Team A is composed of Yu Se-rin and Kang Jian. Team B is composed of Yang Dongjun and Hong Ah-riam. Team C is composed of Cho Song-yai and Bong Jun-hyun. And Team D is composed of Lee Taejun and Kim Jun-hyun. They were instructed to go to their respective locations, and our protagonist starts talking to the big guy on his team, calling him by name, surprised to see him there too. Jun-hyun says it would be good to work with his senior, Kim Jun-hyun, rank C, from the Bikshin Guild. We see them entering the portal while being observed by Jin Hyuk, who thinks that Taejun will regret using him for his own benefit, mentally warning him that it wouldn't be as easy as he thought. Junhyun nods at him. The two enter the dungeon, and inside we see a huge dead serpent impaled by spikes with a skull in the darkness sitting on a throne. We see a flashback to the Bikshin Guild, where Jin-hyuk was asking if Junhyun was listening carefully, warning him that Junhyun only needed to participate in the rank B evaluation and disrupt Taejun. Route D was designed to be most difficult, and if Junhyun disrupted Taejun, he wouldn't be able to pass easily. He then asks if the poor guy's mother isn't in serious condition and tells him to take the chance to make some money to help pay for the surgery, promising a generous reward if the mission is completed. With Jin-hyuk telling him to just trust him and move forward, we return to the present, where Junhyun is thinking about how he ended up on Route D with Taejun. Our protagonist points to some white snakes, calling them monsters, and with one swift punch, the three snakes have their heads crushed. He wonders why they're so weak and why they gave so little experience. Junhyun is confused by the protagonist's strength and the fact that his explosive growth ability is active, but only increases experience by a small amount. Junhyun thinks to himself about how Taejun got so strong since just a few weeks ago they weren't that different. Back at Bikshin, they were at the lowest ranks, but even in that position, Taejun didn't lose hope. We see a conversation between them, with Taejun admiring Junhyun's ability to absorb his opponent's attacks and stating that someone with a skill like his would eventually shine, as long as he kept trying. Junhyun recalls how Taejun, as a great senior, gave him hope when he had none. Now his mission was to make Taejun fail, and he couldn't help but think that this was the kind of thing only scum would do. But he had no choice. He needed to pay for his mother's surgery, so he had to do it for his family. He approaches the protagonist, calling out to him, and hands him a bottle, saying it would be difficult, so he should at least take it. He explains that it's a buff potion he brings on expeditions and that it would be good for him to use it. Taejun thanks him and drinks it, while Junhyun thinks that the protagonist has successfully drunk the paralysis poison and Taejun will become weaker over time. But as soon as Junhyun stops thinking, the protagonist starts complaining about pain, saying that some devil is waking up inside him, asking for a bathroom. Junhyun says there is no bathroom in the area, and Taejun says there's no choice but to quickly clear the dungeon. Taejun receives a notification from his status window that his resistance to all poison skill is active, while the chubby guy wonders if he has any kind of resistance. Sometime later, deeper into the dungeon, the protagonist observes a huge hole in the cave and says that it's a dead end due to the deep hole ahead, so they should go back. But the design of the place gives the feeling that they're walking in circles. Junhyun looks at the protagonist's back, thinking that this is his chance. If he pushes him, Taejun wouldn't die from the fall, and this might be his only chance to disrupt the evaluation. He shouts an apology to the protagonist while charging to push him down, but ends up missing, leaving both of them confused. As the protagonist is about to fall, he grabs Junhyun's leg in desperation, shouting, asking if he wants to die by suddenly throwing himself off a cliff. Junhyun desperately calls himself garbage and asks to be left to die. And when Taejun asks what he's talking about, Junhyun explains that he was trying to make him fail the evaluation by putting him in danger. He finishes by asking Taejun to let someone like him fall. Taejun tells him to talk about it later, and that it's not a good time, as in his mind he's thinking that this time it's serious. He has extreme stomach pain, and he wonders if he can relieve himself nearby since no one will be watching his live stream. But as soon as he looks around, there are 10 spectators. Thinking that he can't let this be seen, he tries to pull Junhyun up, but the ground gives way, and they both fall to the bottom of the pit. After the fall, both of them complain of pain in the darkness when a strange animal sound appears, and countless snakes emerge from the darkness, heading toward them. We see the other groups. Team B is in trouble. Both are extremely exhausted, and while the observer asks if they'll be able to make it through, Hong Ah-ryum starts screaming for her mother, asking to leave. With her resignation, Team B is eliminated, while poor Yang Dong-jun is left behind, asking for help. Meanwhile, in Team C, they're fighting each other, almost leading to their elimination. Then the last one left is Team A. The observer asks if they'll be able to make it through, as we see Yu Serin speaking to the camera, announcing that they will defeat the 1,000-year-old white snakes. As soon as she says she's ready, she looks back to see Kang Jian charging at the snakes, shouting "Aura, aura, aura, aura" like Jotaro. She gets scared because he's doing everything by himself, while Kang says this evaluation will get him noticed by his boss, and he won't let this chance slip. She complains that he wants all the spotlight for himself, but she won't let that happen. Raising her hand, she uses her freezing wind skill, freezing many snakes as they are hit. She shouts that she won't be a secondary character. She will be the main character of this test. Team A advances in the test, meeting the expectations as the potential of the 4 major guilds, and they are the first to enter the boss room. They arrive in front of the Jin-hyuk, who congratulates them for making it this far and says he will lead them to the boss. Yu Serin asks if Taejun hasn't arrived yet, and Jin-hyuk responds that since Team D doesn't have a live stream, they've probably been eliminated. Kang says he told them Taejun wasn't much, but Yu Serin simply says she had high expectations from a direct recommendation from Soo-hyun. Jin-hyuk asks them to follow him to the boss room, hiding a malicious smile. They enter the boss room, and Jin-hyuk thinks about how disappointed Soo-hyun would be if he found out about this. But all three are stunned by the sight of a huge serpent, impaled by spikes, and a large skeleton sitting on a throne, staring at them and saying something unrecognizable. They all wonder what the hell that is. We return to Team D with the explanation of Junhyun's ability, which absorbs magical skills from opponents and returns them to the attacker. The more it absorbs, the more powerful it becomes, but he cannot absorb more than his capacity. And when the absorption meets the archmage's fireball, it forms a new ability, the Hell Train. The two are sent flying toward the top with a cannon of blue flames coming out of Junhyun's backside. Our protagonist on Junhyun's shoulders asks him if he can still take more, and Junhyun agrees. The protagonist points upward, telling him to head straight for the boss room. We cut directly to Team A with Jin-hyuk thinking that the dungeon boss should have been the Imuji according to the original plan. However, the Imuji is dead and a lich is facing them. Jin-Hyuk can only think that someone must have tampered with the dungeon. Seren asks if this is really happening and screams, questioning why there's a lich in the area. The massive dead serpent begins to rise as Jin-Hyuk orders everyone to move back behind him. At that moment, the serpent attacks, lifting Jin-Hyuk and causing team members to shout that they can't just stand by and watch. Both begin to attack the creature. However, the lich simply raises his finger, causing ice stakes to shoot toward them, striking them. Just as Jin-Hyuk thinks he'll have to defeat the lich to stop the Imuji, he charges toward the lich's back, only to be held down by the serpent's tail, immobilized. While thinking that he's been careless, he questions if he's really going to die so easily, without even being able to say his last words to Seona. However, his thoughts and the snake's attack are interrupted by the two clumsy ones, who hit the snake's head with the hell train, leaving Jin-Hyuk staring at them confused. Taejun and Jun-Hyun celebrate for reaching the boss room, while Jin-Hyuk thinks that he's happy to be alive, but that's not important right now. He stares at the two clumsy ones, calling out to them and warning them to stay away from the Imuji. While dodging a direct strike from the serpent, the protagonist asks if a lich alongside an Imuji isn't too much for a rank B test. Jin-Hyuk replies that apparently someone interfered with the evaluation, and maybe someone wanted one of them to fail. He adds that it's probably someone who can control the guilds or maybe even someone connected to other guilds. The protagonist says he understands and points at the serpent and the lich, asking if they just need to defeat them. The stressed out Jin-Hyuk confirms and says that he really doesn't want to work with the protagonist. The two agree it's only temporary while they move forward. Jin-Hyuk warns them to be careful while shouting and using his spear to slice through the spikes flying toward him. Taejun assures that he's not distracted and launches another fire Kamehameha against the spikes, eventually hitting the snake's head. Finally, at his side, Jin-Hyuk thrusts his spears forward and initiates the second form of the divine spear technique, slashing at the Imugi from multiple angles simultaneously. With the help of Team A, Seren unleashes freezing energy into Kang's hands, and he charges toward the seemingly defenseless lich. Kang makes sure not to miss this opportunity, advancing with a direct punch that pierces the lich. The protagonist doesn't waste time, thrusting a burning flame into Jun-Hyun's mouth, launching the hell train at the lich again. They all celebrate its defeat, while the lich remains frozen, but suddenly, they are surprised to see it return to its original state, as if nothing had happened. While reciting unpronounceable words, bones rise from the ground like spikes, piercing all of them in various places. Everyone is wounded by the surprise attack as Taejun thinks that even though the lich is strong, it shouldn't be immune to damage. He wonders what he might be missing, since he doesn't know enough about liches. However, while the protagonist is thinking, Mary's voice asks if he has forgotten about her, informing him that it was very difficult to download the app and hack it. From this moment on, they will fight using the map as their main weapon. She tells him to try hacking the map and fight. He asks her what the hell she's talking about, as she never mentioned this before, but the status window appears showing the loading of the dungeon mapping, acquiring information such as monsters, structure, and details, and informs that it would recreate a map. Once completed, a mental hologram appears in front of him with a screen announcing that parsley navigation has been activated. Taejun asks Mary what parsley navigation is, and she explains that by using it, he would be able to discover various information about dungeons such as enemy abilities, secret routes, and rewards. This would allow him to learn a lot about the dungeons. Additionally, she installed apps that he could actively use in combat. The protagonist thinks to himself that this is not just a hack to see, but a complete assistant since it has many useful functions. He confirms that the original boss should be the B-class Imuji and wonders where the hell this lich came from. Staring at the lich, it suddenly starts making strange sounds, which incredibly, he can understand. The lich informs that Eritis is happy, and our protagonist realizes he has an app that translates monster language, thinking how creepy this is, and asks Miri what's happening. She confirms it must be a bug, but both are interrupted as Eritis says he's grateful to his contractor for giving him such fresh and strong humans. Our protagonist thinks it's strange because it doesn't seem like a bug, and since he mentioned a contractor, maybe someone summoned him forcefully. The protagonist asks Jin-Hyuk if he can move, and when he confirms that he avoided the fatal blow, the protagonist says that even if he doesn't believe it, he has found the lich's weakness. There's no time to explain, they just need to confirm and trust him. They stay in a brief silence until Jin-Hyuk asks what they should do. The protagonist replies that the first thing they should do is annoy him. At the same time, the protagonist starts jumping, calling the lich a skeleton, and asks why he isn't attacking, wondering if his brain is frozen, all while making faces and sticking out his tongue. This irritates the skeleton to the point that he questions if the protagonist wants to die sooner, banging his staff on the ground, warning that he would bring them all down. The protagonist is able to see alerts of where bone spikes would come out of the ground and tells everyone to gather around him, barely escaping them this time. Smiling, Taejun confirms that it's just like the manager said. He can really see the attack paths, and with that, he can execute the plan. He starts mocking the poor guy for missing all his attacks, and that he really does have a legendary shooting skill, which only angers the skeleton more. The skeleton, furious, launches several flaming skulls, and taking advantage of the moment, Taejun begins coordinating their movements, telling Jian to move 3 steps to the side and Jun-Hyun to move 5 steps back, making both dodge attacks that almost kill them. As John praises their skill, Eritis starts shouting that they're good at dodging, but he wants to see them dodge the next one. As dark energy emanates through the room, the protagonist sees that there are warning signs of the attack everywhere, making it impossible to dodge. While they ask how they should dodge, Taejun thinks that it's a huge attack area, and there's only one way to avoid it. Meanwhile, Eritis announces his ability, the Requiem of Death. It generates mass destruction, annihilating everything around him, and when it finishes, he calls the humans idiots, saying that when they dodge too much, it's easy to use an ability that cannot be dodged. However, the lich is surprised when the protagonist shouts for them to go, and the 3 of them, Jin-Hyuk, Taejun, and Seren, emerge from the smoke generated by the ability, while the protagonist yells that the lich's abilities are on cooldown. The lich screams, asking how it's possible that they survived that and what's going on. The text explains that the Requiem of Death is an area attack ability with a vast range, where the strength increases the farther they are from the center and decreases as they approach. With this information obtained through parsley navigation, Taejun warns everyone to get closer to him to avoid severe damage. We return to the protagonist ordering Sirin to attack, and she launches the freezing wind directly at the lich, immobilizing him. Eridus congratulates them for blocking his attack, but warns that their attacks won't affect him. Knowing this, the protagonist tells them to prevent the lich from moving while he runs toward his back. The skeleton stares at him, trying to understand what he's going to do, but begins to panic. Taejun thinks as he runs that liches summoned by contracts accept sacrifices and remain virtually immortal until the offering is destroyed in some way. Our protagonist runs toward a box full of seals while stating that if he destroys this box, he will cancel the summoning. The lich gets even angrier, asking how they dare deceive him, charging at the protagonist and breaking the freezing spell, screaming incomprehensible words while trying to strike Taejun in close combat. But just as he almost hits, Jin-hyuk and the others attack from behind, with Jung-hyun throwing himself on top of him and the cross spears pinning him to the ground. They inform him that they've stopped him and tell Taejun to finish the job. While he thanks them, he prepares to deliver a punch to the lich, telling him to stop. The protagonist's punch opens a hole in the wall, revealing a small chest, and he rushes like a psychopath to grab it. The lich remains trapped by the group as he tries to grab his staff, but Jin-hyuk can only think about whether the protagonist really knew the weakness and if it was truly hidden. He fails to notice Eridus activating his magic as he struggles to rise, thinking it's impossible, and that only he and his contractor should know about the offering. Jin-hyuk continues trying to hold him in place by attacking, but he doesn't succeed, and the lich advances toward the protagonist. Up ahead, our protagonist, holding the box, warns the skeleton that if he continues being stubborn, he will destroy the box, once again wearing an evil smile. The lich stands up in front of the protagonist, asking if he understands the ancient language. Ignoring the question, Taejun states that the lich should listen closely, as it could save his life. Eridus begins laughing, claiming that he is a contracted being and cannot obey any order except from his contractor. Our protagonist simply says that if that's the case, they should just cancel the contract and be done with it. The lich then explains that it wouldn't be possible as maybe an ancient mage could do it, but someone like him would never be able to do such a thing. Taejun then questions if he really looks like an ordinary human to him, leaving Eridus confused. The protagonist not only figured out his magic, but also located the offering, making Eridus wonder if Taejun really could cancel his contract. After thinking it over, the lich kneels, saying he would believe him for now, asking what he desired and affirming he would fulfill his wishes with a strange expression on his face. The protagonist once again thinks about the pain in his stomach and says that first he should undo the skeletons outside, warning that before entering he summons several skeletons. He then looks at parsley navigation while Eridus asks how he discovered that. Meanwhile, we see the rest of the group fighting the skeletons outside, and the protagonist warns that if he lies, his head will be destroyed, forcing the lich to comply. After finishing the summons, the lich asks if the protagonist has any more wishes. The protagonist starts to smile psychotically again while telling him to give him everything he has. The skeleton gets scared, asking what he means by everything he has, and Taejun informs him that he's referring to the items and accessories, asking if he didn't have something to give him. Eridus claims that he doesn't have anything useful, but since the protagonist isn't stupid, he points to the lich's staff, saying it's interesting. The poor skeleton tries to hide the staff, claiming that it couldn't happen, but changes his mind when the protagonist holds the box and says he will break it. The protagonist grabs the staff, and Eridus starts questioning if he could break the contract, saying that if he could, he would do anything for him. However, the protagonist simply responds with a clueless expression, saying that he didn't know how to break the contract, which leaves the lich incredibly confused. Finally, the protagonist tells him that he can't break a contract, since he doesn't even know any summoning magic, advising him to have more sense with his words. Eridus becomes furious after this remark, shouting that he dared to deceive him, but as he threatens and approaches, the protagonist says he warned him that if he came any closer, he would break the offering. Without hesitation, the protagonist lifts the chest and throws it to the ground, causing the lich's body to begin disintegrating as he mutters complaints. In the end, he disappears, saying he was so close to returning. The protagonist and Miri can only comment that even in death, Eridus left in style. The protagonist then kneels, picking up a rotten finger from the ground and asking if that was really the offering, noting it seemed quite important since it summoned such a powerful being. Mary asks who could have summoned the lich, and Taejun says it doesn't matter since he got a great item from it. But Mary points out that there is still another item, indicating a small octahedron on the ground. Taejun approaches to inquire about other items, picking it up to examine it. Noticing he can't figure it out, he just says it must be expensive since it fell from the skull. However, he is interrupted by the rest of the group running inside, asking if he's alright, and he hides the staff in the status window. Jin-hyuk takes the lead, asking if he really managed to defeat the lich alone. The protagonist confirms, saying that the lich appeared without leaving a trace. Jin, who is accompanying Jin-hyuk, admits that even though he hates to admit it, our protagonist is a very strong hunter, just like Sirin and Jung-hyun, who agreed with John. While they were celebrating in the back, Jin-hyuk approached our protagonist to speak directly with him, apologizing for poisoning him and causing him to be pushed into the pit. He explained that Jung-hyun had only done that because he had ordered him to. To compliment his apology, he admitted that he wasn't sure why he had done all of that to Taejun, and most importantly, he didn't know how they had lost their friendship and drifted apart. However, he said he thought thought it might be because he didn't like the fact that our protagonist had worked so hard without having talent and never seemed to progress, but he sincerely felt sorry and offered a heartfelt apology to our protagonist. However, the protagonist began to mock him, saying that next time he should make it a little more obvious, as he hadn't noticed Junhyun's failed attempts until now. He especially laughed at the fact that Jin-hyuk thought you would fall for something so common. Finally, he joked that Jin-hyuk must have hit his head to think something like that. Before Jin-hyuk could even question him, Taejin told him to forget about those things and simply celebrate becoming a Class B by eating something later. The Hothead agreed and asked Taejin what he wanted to eat, saying he'd figure out a way to get it. Of course, our protagonist wanted that perfectly cooked Korean steak. But cutting the subject short, the Hothead whispered in the protagonist's ear, asking if he, by any chance, liked Lee Shen-ah. The look of disgust on the protagonist's face was priceless. Along with that face, he started laughing at Jin-hyuk and pointing at him. The blushing Hothead simply told him to shut up and stop making that stupid face. While they were arguing in the back, Jun-hyun informed everyone that the gate had opened and they could now leave, especially since Jun was eager to have a grand meal to celebrate. After they all crossed the greenish portal, they were met by two people who confirmed that everyone had returned safely and congratulated them on progressing to Class B. The two people were Siu Yan-hwa, a blue-haired woman with a strange aura from the Clear Sky Guild, and Mata Payam, a burly red-haired man with a peculiar style from the Whoring Guild. In short, both of them are badass. Siu Yan started talking about already knowing about the alteration in the test, and I'm almost sure she was making a JoJo reference, walking towards them while emanating that greenish aura. She stated that alterations like the Imuji turning into an undead and even the presence of a lich were impossible to occur on such a scale. The eccentric woman began to say that the culprit was certainly someone who was keeping both guilds under control. She then stopped in front of our protagonist, saying that he was the culprit with a rather sadistic smile. And while he was confused, both Sirin and Jian were equally perplexed by the situation. They stated that the protagonist had helped them during the fight and fought alongside them, so he couldn't have done it. However, she laid the card on the table that from what she had seen, Taejin did everything alone. They had watched the entire fight against the lich via the broadcast, and not only did our protagonist guide them to dodge every attack, but he also discovered the secret location on his own. Even though they didn't know what was there, it was certain that it was the lich's weakness. She insisted that it was very strange and suspicious for a D-rank hunter like our protagonist to know such critical information. As she mentioned these facts, everyone started questioning whether it was actually a possibility. Siu Jian was the most insistent, asking the protagonist once again if he really knew the lich would appear. She said this almost as both a threat and a statement. However, we see that our protagonist was so scared he couldn't even pass an atom, his face frozen in a strange expression, thinking he had absolutely no idea this was going to happen. But he didn't even have time to say anything as Mata approached, asking why the protagonist was hesitating so much and declaring that if he didn't answer quickly, he would crush him right there. The protagonist only grew more fearful, wondering if this lunatic was really thinking about killing him. But he knew he had to stay calm and think of a way to clarify the situation since, whether he liked it or not, he really did look suspicious. While he recapped everything that had happened so far, the lich, the sacrifice, and the contractor, he reached a conclusion and asked everyone to wait a moment and listen to him. He activated his actor mode once again, saying that ever since he was a child, his dream was to become a necromancer, leaving the two guild members speechless. He continued his fantastic performance, saying that since childhood he had studied and learned all the characteristics and abilities of the undead as well as their weaknesses. He pointed his finger directly at the investigators, saying that it was precisely because of this knowledge that he was able to deduce the lich's weakness was hidden somewhere. But the woman simply asked if he really thought she would believe such a poor lie. If she didn't believe him, he said she should see his trump card. He pulled out the finger used in the sacrifice that had been inside a sarcophagus. That finger meant that someone had made a contract with the lich, and that it wasn't a monster deliberately placed in the test. Someone had placed it there through a contract to manipulate the exam. And Taejin dropped a bombshell, a very solid argument. Since the lich could never disobey the orders of its contractor, it meant neither he nor his companions could have been behind the incident. Siu Dian pointed out that if it really was the protagonist who had manipulated the exam, there would be no reason for him to protect his companions. The red-haired man simply asked who it could be, since it wasn't the protagonist, wondering if it might be someone from the Dark Magic Guild. But Taejin was certain of one thing: the culprit was still inside the area, and he shouted loudly for everyone to check the hands of the people present. While everyone searched for the culprit, a man in the middle of the crowd began running desperately, trying to escape. As he passed through the crowd, everyone was sure that he was the culprit and the owner of the finger. The protagonist boasted to Miri that this was exactly how culprits were caught in detective mangas. While Miri stared at him blankly, the red-haired man lunged at the culprit, alongside the woman who trapped the man with a barrier spell. Mata used his technique, Divine Art of the Dominant Dragon, Dragon Strike. In that moment, he looked exactly like Gai Sensei with the 8th gate activated. But before he could even land the hit, the man was already lifeless on the ground. Furious that the man had taken himself out, Mata ordered people to send the corpse to the respective guild and to investigate where he had come from and what he was doing. Sudion wondered who would be crazy enough to use dark magic to target both the Whoring and Clear Sky guilds, and promised to find out who had planned all of this. And as if she were bipolar, she looked at our protagonist with the sweetest face, apologizing for the misunderstanding and assuring him she would repay him for the incident. However, our protagonist had already collapsed, fainting from mana exhaustion. He could only hear everyone calling his name as he lost consciousness. The protagonist woke up, wondering where he was, with someone thanking him for finally waking up. It was Lee Sin-ah and Choi Jin-hyuk. After he asked why they were there, Sin-ah said it was because their friend had fainted, and Jin-hyuk joked that he was just checking if he was really dead. The red-haired girl asked how hard the protagonist had to push himself to faint from exhaustion, since the doctor had had a lot of trouble treating him. Moreover, he had made an enormous impact during the Class B ranking test. She made sure to show the protagonist her phone with the news about the exam. Everyone Everyone was congratulating him for carrying the entire team on his back. Jin-hyuk even had the courage to say that without him, Taejun wouldn't have been able to do anything. But the red-haired girl told him to stop lying since everything was in the published video showing the protagonist doing everything by himself. While they argued, the protagonist thought about how long it had been since they had talked so casually and as friends. During their conversation, someone knocked on the door, asking if Taejun was awake, and then entered. It was Soo Yeon-hwa, the representative of the Clear Sky Guild, surprising all three of them. She informed them that the hospital they were in was managed by her. When the protagonist had fainted, they had brought him there since the hospital was under the guild's management, and he could rest easy since she owed him a debt. That debt was specifically because he had saved a precious member of her guild, Yu Se-rin. She started speaking in a somewhat strange way, saying she never thought she'd see Se-rin again, which already made hearts ache at the thought of what could have happened. Then she leaned on the protagonist's bed and asked what he wanted, saying she would do anything he asked. And that was very strange, to say the least. Was she trying to seduce our protagonist? The protagonist says he's not sure what to ask for since he can't think of anything, and while he's speaking, Jin-hyuk, unlike our very Sigma protagonist, turns completely red witnessing this seduction. Yin states that there's plenty of time and he doesn't need to decide so quickly. She'll be waiting in the office on the top floor whenever he has a request. As soon as she left the room, Sienna immediately hugged him, congratulating him on improving so much, while Jin-hyuk couldn't believe it, calling him lucky. The redhead says it feels like just yesterday she was watching our protagonist getting lost in dungeons and struggling against weak creatures, and now he's become so much better. After finishing the hug, she asks if he's already decided, and just like before, he still hadn't thought of anything he really wanted. Since he's unsure about what to ask for, Sienna explains that they're talking about the vice leader of a guild, so he could ask her for something related to magic without any problem, as that's basic for her. But she warns that at this moment, what matters most to Taejun is rest, so he could think about it later. She offers him a bottle with a drink, telling him to recover quickly while smiling. The protagonist thanked her and sent goodbye since Sienna and Jin-hyuk had things to do and were going to leave him to rest. After they left, Mary comments on how lucky our protagonist really was, saying that just thinking about a beauty like the vice leader offering to fulfill any wish was enough to make her little heart race. Meanwhile, the protagonist has the perfect you what face and asks what the hell she's talking about. He stops to really think about what he could ask for, considering money but realizing it would be a terrible choice. Since she's an S-rank hunter, she could easily get something priceless. Before choosing, he needs to consider what he really needs right now. He remembers something and asks Mary where the items he previously bought went. She explains that they were probably automatically stored in the parsley market, but Taejun once again looks confused, not understanding what she's talking about. On the other hand, Mary is very happy to see that the protagonist finally asked about the market. She had been waiting to explain it for a while. It's essentially a platform where users simultaneously sell things to each other, with 100 million users from various dimensions trading among themselves. If Taejun registers right now, he'll receive bonuses such as no exchange fees, secure transactions, and 7% member rewards. The protagonist couldn't stop thinking that this was really an aid, and speaking of ads, have you liked the video yet? The protagonist starts thinking about really being the only person on Earth with access to the market system, and only now does he realize that he's the only one in the entire world with this system, at least updated. Taking advantage of being unique, he can open a store to resell since he's the only one who can buy. That way, he'd be able to monopolize the entire market for himself, wearing a villainous grin. Meanwhile, Murray looks shocked at the protagonist's reaction as she wasn't expecting something like this. The protagonist directly clicked to enter Parsley Market, and after verifying all this information, he was fully registered and his entire body was transported to another location. In a huge medieval city, we see the protagonist looking around at many people holding items, offering them for strange values like 1.8 at. Taejun can't help but think that this looks exactly like a game. But since they're already there, Mary tells him to take a look at the items. He goes directly to the first vendor they see, a man with strange horns, a monocle, and a weird beard. He shows off a red shield he had displayed earlier, an item called the Dragon Cinnamon Shield. It's a Class B item made from dragon scales, giving it great resistance, and it costs 18,000 parsley coins. He finally asks Mary how much a parsley coin is worth, and he is extremely shocked to learn that 18,000 would be approximately 240,000 magic stones, equivalent to a few million won. The worst part is that this is the base price for things in this market, so it only goes up from there. It's clear there's nothing here the protagonist can buy. However, he remembers he had picked up some items earlier that he could sell and wonders how much they would be worth. He pulls an item from his inventory, saying he's a newbie, and asks the horned bald man how much that staff would cost. Apparently, the staff is completely unsellable because it's cursed, and unless someone is a very powerful mage, they wouldn't be able to use it, making it impossible to sell. Since he can't sell the staff, the protagonist extends a strange stone to him, asking how much it's worth. Since it's from the same monster, a protagonist is genuinely surprised by its value, as it's worth nothing more than 10 coins. This is practically trash, and it shatters the hopes of a rich and monopolized future the protagonist was imagining. As the horned bald man waves goodbye, Mary tries to console him, saying that small amounts grow over time and that things don't happen overnight. You should relax. However, a man approaches, saying he wants to take a look at the crystal and asking if Taejun has time for a trade. It's actually a very short demon lord, but our protagonist says that the crystal is just some random junk. The demon insists he accept the deal, saying it's fine. As soon as he takes it in his hands and examines it, he confirms that he was right. If he were to improve that item, it would become very useful. Since he's there, he even covered the cost of the improvement himself. But before our protagonist can feel completely happy and grateful, the demon adds a condition. If the protagonist fails to improve the item, he'll have to pay all the costs himself. But if he succeeds, it'll be free. Naturally, our protagonist is confused because the guy had a truly demonic grin while looking at Taejun. Of course, Mary realizes something's wrong and whispers into the protagonist's ear, warning him that the guy is actually actually a scammer. They basically trick rookies with absurd enchantment and upgrade costs, and it's the most common scam in the market. Only a fool would fall for it. The protagonist asks if he can stop upgrading whenever he wants, and of course, the demon agrees, knowing that the protagonist will fail somehow. And since our protagonist is the fool, he accepts the deal, leaving Mary panicked, trying to pull him away and saying this is going to go badly. But of course, our boy wouldn't enter such an unfair deal without a strategy. He has his own methods and tells her to sit and watch. He's about to show her what it means to break through with sheer luck. With his explosive growth activating again, the success rate has increased. And the strategies here are going to be quite simple. Basically, Taejun can keep upgrading as much as he wants, and the cost of each upgrade will be paid by the demon. But if he fails even once, he would have to bear all the costs himself. The greater the success, the higher the risk he would face. The demon transferred the items and money to our protagonist, asking if he would like to go to the perfect place. But our protagonist just scoffed, saying he didn't need something like that for the first upgrade. He clicked without fear, and the obsidian crystal became an item with a +1 enchantment. The demon congratulated him, saying that Taejun was already 80% closer to success. Slightly bolder than expected, the demon began provoking our protagonist, asking if he was really going to do just one upgrade and call himself a man. With a crazy smile, Taejun confidently declared that he would easily reach enchantment +9. The demon was left confused, asking if Taejun was really sure, as it was extremely risky. Internally, the demon was calling our protagonist an idiot and a beginner, since the chance of success for the +9 enchantment was less than 0.01% or 1 in 1,000. Of course, he sent all the items to the protagonist with a smile, already knowing he would fail. As soon as he received them, Taejun smiled and started clicking on the upgrade screen like a psychopath without even hesitating. Mary was in shock, screaming at him to stop, and the demon laughed, calling him crazy, saying that all the costs would fall on our protagonist. But our favorite trickster simply mocked him, showing the stone and revealing that it was a success. Just being +9 already guarantees +10 in all stats and an additional 20% mana recovery per hour. Laughing in the same position as before, not out of amusement, but because he was also in shock, the demon questioned how the protagonist had done it, as it was almost impossible. Even while trying to maintain his composure, internally he was panicking because Taejun had succeeded without a single failure, even wondering if our protagonist might be an administrator. But he couldn't let things end that way, as it would mean a huge loss for him. So he congratulated our protagonist, saying it was indeed an impressive feat, but since he had come this far, he might as well go for the final upgrade. After all, it was just one more enchantment to reach the maximum. The little red demon was now biting his nails and making some strange expressions that only Taejun noticed. Of course, our protagonist was a bit nervous about this challenge. Thanks to explosive growth, he had a 100% chance to upgrade up to level +9. The final upgrade, even with the buff, would only have a 10% chance, a far cry from the initial 0.001% or 1 in a million. If he insisted and failed, he would truly lose everything he had. Additionally, our protagonist was satisfied with his current stats, but he couldn't help but be curious about how overpowered a max level item must be for the odds to be so low. Predictably, he couldn't resist his curiosity and agreed to do it, but he said he had one condition for the demon: to take him to the perfect place. Arriving at the peak Parian upgrade point, they saw many people without clothes, desperately begging for a chance to upgrade an item. Clearly, all of them had become addicted to the little tiger, having lost everything. Our protagonist could only feel the sorrow and sadness for the lost items. When Miri asked if that place really increased the chances, he simply said that nothing had changed, this time with his heart clenched in fear. The protagonist began explaining that luck is a flow. Whether you have a 10% or a 1% chance, at some point, success will come. The real challenge was reading the flow of luck, as timing is essential for success, and anyone can overcome the odds even with ridiculous chances. Our protagonist began asking Mary if she couldn't feel the sorrow of so many items. He explained that there he could feel precisely when to proceed or when not to. The applause and regret of so many people served to determine the flow of luck, and at that moment, all the flow was with him. Without hesitation, he clicked to enchant again, and of course the demon thought he was crazy, as attempting a full upgrade was sheer stupidity, with almost zero chance of success. This left everyone tense, including 3 references that appeared in the scene: Robin, Dhalsim from Street Fighter, and a third character that was unrecognizable but seemed like a reference. In what could only be described as pure luck, the protagonist successfully upgraded the item to the maximum level and celebrated by shouting aloud, "Sa you," like Cristiano Ronaldo. The obsidian crystal was now +10 with something called Twilight Glow. Everyone around was stunned, because not only was it the first time seeing a max upgraded item, but it was also made from a material of national power. Of course, now that the little red demon had lost, he was furious, calling our protagonist a scammer. But as the saying goes, a hustler is a hustler, and a fool was a fool. Even as the demon accused Taejun of using some illegal means like a program to cheat the system, the protagonist simply asked who the real scammer was, since the demon had been trying to extort him while pretending to help. Angry, the demon warned that Taejun would never log in again under his watch and began filing complaints. However, the protagonist simply blocked him and left the parsley market, leaving the scammer behind, screaming for his resources to be returned. Back in his hospital bed, Taejun was celebrating having mastered an item for free, calling the demon cute. Of course, Mary scolded him, saying it was far too risky. If he had lost, he wouldn't have been able to pay for all the coins and materials. But our little actor just said that if he had failed, he would have simply run away. Once again, he entered Psychopath Mode 2.0, staring at the obsidian crystal and asking it who the real scammer was, calling the demon naive and dumb. Of course, he was happy because he had received excellent information from the market. While holding the staff, he said he might even be able to use it. Cutting to the top floor of the Clear Sky Guild Hospital, where Siu Yeonho's office was located, our protagonist entered, greeting the guild's vice leader. Out of politeness, she asked if he was feeling better. He replied that he was, and although he wasn't fully recovered, he could at least move around. She mentioned that if he had come there, it was because he had decided what what he wanted. Meanwhile, she thought about how undeniably Taejin had placed first in the test, and if her intuition was correct, he would grow to become one of the best hunters in Korea. In the middle of her thoughts, our crazy protagonist simply approached, took her hand, and declared that he wanted her. In the next scene, we see Yan explaining that he actually wanted her ability, asking if our protagonist always spoke in such a strange way. Like the fool he is, he asked if he had said something wrong, and she just shook her head, saying it was a misunderstanding on her part. The vice leader was clearly stressed by the situation, and our clueless protagonist was wondering if he had said something that could be misinterpreted. Even Miri was staring at him in disbelief, both at what she was hearing and seeing. Finally, the vice leader opened the door to a large training center and asked if all he needed was for her to break the curse on his item. That was much simpler than what she had expected him to request. She asked to see the item, and when he handed over the staff, she asked if he had retrieved it when he was still a Class D. After he confirmed truthfully whether he wanted to or not, she went on with her magic, her hands glowing green. She said that with her ability, which specializes in breaking curses, it wouldn't take too long. The ability was incredibly cool, forming something like a key above the item, descending like an unlocking door. Both the protagonist and Miri were impressed by the ability of an S-class. She finished activating Dispel Spell, an ability that analyzes and dissipates a type of magic. A curse is nothing more than a complex spell, but no matter how intricate the curse, it cannot overpower Dispel Spell. However, behind her, our protagonist appeared with a psychotic look on his face, holding a small obsidian crystal and extending it towards her back. It was revealed that, aside from its other characteristics, the crystal possessed a mimic ability, which scans and stores the target's ability. This was exactly what the protagonist had wanted from the beginning. He would have been satisfied with just breaking the curse on the item, but obtaining such a rare ability was an incredible chance. However, before he could act, a rift suddenly opened above the ability and struck Yan by surprise, hitting her directly in the stomach. The creature absorbed her energy for some reason. In a panic, the protagonist lunged forward, screaming the vice leader's name, and delivered a flying kick to the creature's face. However, all physical attacks were completely ineffective. Since physical attacks weren't working, our protagonist launched a blue fireball at 20% of his strength directly at the creature's chest, sending it flying across the room. Logically, he rushed to aid Yan, but she assured him she wasn't mortally wounded. She had just let her guard down, not expecting something like that to appear. The protagonist asked where it came from and what it was, wondering if it was some kind of monster. But she denied it, saying it wasn't a monster, even though it looked like one. It was the curse itself taking physical form, a cursed spirit. The protagonist was shocked to realize that the curse on the staff had taken physical form. Yan explained that the curse was more deeply rooted in the item than she had expected, and the only way to remove it without damaging the staff was through her Dispel Spell ability. The problem was that the creature had hit her with an ability, preventing her from using the Dispel at that moment. Since she couldn't use her own ability, she prepared to channel her magic by conjuring a sort of staff in multiple magic circles, as if preparing to launch a mana-firing squad at the creature. However, this would destroy the protagonist's staff, which he obviously wasn't happy about. In desperation, he asked if she had an ability called Power Infusion, begging her to lend him Dispel Spell. Even though his idea wasn't bad, she warned him that the cursed spirit wasn't something he could defeat just by borrowing her power, as it was a high-level curse with a complex spell structure. Even she would need time to eliminate it. He agreed with her reasoning, but asked if she could trust him just this once. Overcome by his charisma, she disabled her active ability and told him to listen carefully, as without her guidance, it would be very difficult. She placed her hand on his back and he began to absorb her energy. She warned him that it wouldn't last long, so he needed to be quick. With the Power Infusion buff, he was allowed to use Dispel Spell. He thought that if she couldn't do it, he had to succeed. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted the crystal on the floor and began copying the ability while using Dispel Spell as a shield, preventing the creature from approaching. The crystal finished mimicking Yanho's S-class ability, and we saw that it had 2 slots for storing abilities, meaning there was still 1 more slot available. Apparently, our protagonist was lucky, as he had the Calculator ability. It fused with Dispel Spell thanks to explosive growth. Instead of manually calculating everything like Yan, the ability calculated everything for him automatically. It was basically like hacking. Having finished copying, the vice leader began to instruct him on what to do to use the ability properly, but he simply said he didn't need her help. He had already figured it out. She was confused since this wasn't something one could learn through instinct, yet he told her to trust him. The green energy turned blue, the color of his own energy. Forming an energy gauntlet, he delivered a massive punch, yelling at the creature that he needed the staff, so it should leave it. With a single punch, he practically turned the creature into Toji from Jujutsu Kaisen. It began trying to flee, missing half its body. Yan was understandably shocked that he could master an ability she herself struggled to use, wondering just how talented our protagonist was. While she was still in shock, he kept attacking the curse, tearing away the remaining part of its body until only its head was left. But it no longer had the strength to maintain its form and was completely nullified by Dispel Spell. The curse on the Erratus staff was finally broken. Naturally, he praised Yan, saying she was incredible, and that he could see the difference in their skill levels just by how she handled such a difficult ability. She in turn was thinking that he was far more incredible than she had expected. If he joined Clear Sky, he might even be considered a burden to them. Like a true professional, she asked if he would be interested in joining the Horang Guild, since its leader, Madapayong, had something for him that could be extremely useful. Cutting directly to the Horang Guild headquarters on Guanak Mountain, Mada was already asking if our protagonist really just wanted to see the Ascending Dragon Fist. The guild leader was proud, saying he had made the right choice, as it was the ultimate martial art. As he spoke, he demonstrated with a ghost step and delivered a devastating blow, tearing apart a massive centipede. Our protagonist could only smile, holding the crystal. He had perfectly analyzed Mada's ability. At the Myth Guild headquarters, inside the training room, the protagonist uses the Ascending Dragon Strike on a 3-headed dog that ended up with 2 heads and fell down stinking. Taejin states that first tier items are truly different and thanks the leader of the whoring guild for giving him the martial art for free. However, the system warns that due to the protagonist's low strength statistic, the power of all ascending dragon fist abilities would only reach 50% of their maximum. Naturally, the protagonist gets angry, complaining that there's really no such thing as a free lunch. If he had known it would be like this, he would have followed the advice of the old muscular man and trained regularly. And he's right, go train. Folks, I want all of you in Balneario Camboriú in 2025. Speaking of Balneario, have you left your like, my friend? I hope so. Compared to Taejin's 7 years of suffering, enduring a little more in a way that he actually evolves won't be much. Since he needs to do it, he decides to maximize his strength. He simply summoned a bunch of creatures and charged forward in hand-to-hand combat. We skip to when Sirana appears with some food for our protagonist, asking him to eat, but she remains admiring the view of our shirtless protagonist, steam rising from his body. While wondering how he ended up like this, she noticed he's been acting strangely for a while. Not long ago, he was considered a mediocre hunter, but nowadays he's seen as one of the most promising hunters, having even passed the Class B test with flying colors. Additionally, he's now a person of interest for both Xiu Yan, leader of the Clear Sky Guild, and the leader of the Whoring Guild. This growth is anything but natural. It resembles a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. Although she's happy he's being recognized, it's clear to her that he's becoming more distant. While she's distracted watching the protagonist train, Soo-hyun appears behind her, commenting that she looks worried. She's startled by his sudden appearance, and he mentions he heard she was practicing the vision sword technique in the training room. She gets very nervous because he doesn't know she borrowed the training room without permission for the protagonist. If he finds out, she'll be in big trouble. But he simply taps her head lightly, saying he believes she would never lend their training room to someone without authorization. He mentions sensing an unusual aura, but realizes it was just Taejin. Noticing a martial art the protagonist is using, he approaches, saying he heard our goat pass the rank B classification test. He wasn't wrong about the protagonist in the end and isn't disappointed. The protagonist thanks him for the help, and Soo-hyun asks if he's still working as a freelancer hunter. Since our protagonist hasn't joined a guild or group, he's still freelancing, so it's not a problem for Soo-hyun to make an offer right then. With the protagonist showing interest, he begins to explain that they had scheduled an expedition in a few days with Seona as the team leader. However, one of the team members had to drop out due to a fatal injury, but the redhead interrupts the leader to say she thinks the expedition might be too big of a challenge for Taejin, as it's a grade 2 expedition, and it's the first time they'll be investigating it. They have almost no information about it, and it would be very dangerous. She's clearly worried about him, all cute and blushing. Even Mary seems happy seeing this scene, but all her hope is shattered by the protagonist's thoughts. He believes she's underestimating him. Soo-hyun, however, reassures them, saying they shouldn't worry because with his level of skill, he could definitely participate in the dungeon sweep. He also reminds her that it's an invitation, not an obligation. Finally, he asks the protagonist again what he thinks, since training with real creatures is far more beneficial than in a training room. The protagonist recalls that given his abilities, the advancements he would gain in real battle would be 10 times greater. Naturally, he agrees, but he asks if, as a freelancer, he'd be allowed to take all the magic stones from the monsters he takes down. We don't see the response, and we cut directly to another day. The protagonist receives a message on his phone telling him to arrive precisely at 11:30. He can only think about how irritating that is. While he's thinking, Mary asks if he's sure he wants to enter a dungeon when the person behind manipulating the exam hasn't even been revealed yet. But he says she shouldn't worry because this time he'll be accompanied by Myth Guild members. She asks if he can really trust the Myth Guild. He responds confidently, saying that both the leader of the Whoring Guild and the Myth Guild have been friends for at least 20 years, so there's zero chance the guild is involved in anything shady. Even if they tried to stab him in the back, it wouldn't matter. Even if they ambushed him, they wouldn't be able to defeat him. He says this with such confidence that I'm sure something will go wrong. Mary just tells him not to be so overconfident and to keep his guard up. He keeps walking, and we cut directly to the portal entrance. Seona approaches and asks him to introduce himself to the rest of the team. We meet 3 members: the group's lancer, Choi Yushik, the healer, Yoon Ayang, and No Youngchul, the youngest member, who apparently is a gunslinger. All of them are logically from group 3. They introduce themselves, and finally a protagonist asks if everyone is there so they can enter. But Seona says one person hasn't arrived yet. She informs them that one of her members got injured during training the night before and couldn't come, so they called in a reserve hunter. Before the protagonist can ask who the hunter is, a car starts honking and someone yells, telling him to move out of the way. From inside the car, a large tattooed man with several pieces of jewelry and an expensive bag steps out, asking if the protagonist didn't hear him and questioning if he's deaf. This rude and arrogant looking man is their companion. To be polite, the protagonist approaches, introduces himself, and asks the strange man's name. However, the man just stares at him strangely, spits on the ground near him, and walks away. After spitting, he just keeps walking, saying that if everyone is there, they should hurry up and stop wasting time. The protagonist is clearly furious, veins bulging, almost jumping on the guy's neck and throwing 3 punches at him. But Seona steps in to calm him down, saying that despite his rude appearance and behavior, he's still a well-known figure in the industry. She explains that he's actually a Class A freelancer hunter, Kim Ji-hoon, called trash both for his character and personality, but his skills are unmatched even among Class A hunters. The biggest problem with him is that he abuses his position as a freelancer to monopolize all the magic stones, leaving the entire team without any rewards, not even enough to cover medical expenses. She clearly didn't want to work with him on this expedition, but she had no choice. In Taejin's mind, he's just wondering how he hadn't encountered this type of hunter before. But since Kim Ji-hoon is a class A hunter with no affiliation, the protagonist makes a point to treat this piece of trash the same way he treats everyone else. Inside the portal, we see a crimson sky with Sienna shouting for everyone to remain calm and maintain formation as numerous creatures charge toward them. While the monsters began to rage like RPG barbarians, Kim rushed ahead, yelling that he couldn't waste time on low-level creatures, literally smashing them with his expensive bag. While he pushed ahead of Sienna, she complained about him acting solo since they arrived, hogging all the action. She reminded him that they were a team and needed to cooperate. Otherwise, his reckless behavior would endanger not just himself, but the entire group. However, Kim dismissed her concerns, calling her a crazy bitch and saying she was acting out of fear. He mocked her leadership, claiming she would never get anywhere with that attitude. Sienna was clearly furious, but Kim continued, blaming their lack of progress on her and pointing his finger in her face. He declared that the strongest hunters earn the most money and fame and ended by calling her a joke, questioning how someone like her ended up leading a team. In the background, our protagonist watched with the angriest expression he had made so far. Even Miri looked visibly annoyed by the disrespectful pig. We cut to a castle where they are greeted by Duke Duas, an NPC and lord of this cursed land. As Sienna tried to thank him, Kim rudely interrupted, calling the Duke an old man and demanding he get straight to the point. The Duke explained that this was a land where a great evil had once been sealed long ago. It was completely cursed and unfit for human life. However, an artifact had been used to purify and banish the dark energy. Our protagonist interrupted, stating that it seemed the artifact had been stolen. The Duke confirmed this, explaining that if they could recover it, the land could be restored and life might someday return. The Duke revealed that the invaders had broken the artifact into pieces and carried them in various directions. The team began commenting on how the mission seemed easier than expected for a grade 2 dungeon. They hadn't anticipated a search and retrieve mission, and the monsters guarding the artifact were only slightly stronger than usual. Sienna deduced that the pieces had likely been scattered to the north, south, east, and west. Before she could elaborate, Kim mocked her again for overthinking something so simple. He suggested they split into teams to search for the pieces. Sienna preferred to prioritize safety and keep the group together. But this time, our protagonist agreed with Kim. He even shushed Sienna mid-protest and said he wanted to team up with Kim if no one objected. The team split into 3 groups of 2, and Sienna instructed them to regroup in the south once they had the artifact pieces to face the final challenge together. Our protagonist put on his best acting face, telling Kim he was honored to work with him. He even called him Sir and said he was inspired by Kim's speech to Sienna. He agreed that stronger hunters deserved more money and fame, claiming he wanted to follow Kim's example. Kim, pleased with the flattery, asked for the protagonist's name and said he would help him as long as he stayed close. They eventually arrived at a graveyard, and the protagonist asked why Kim chose this spot. Kim nonchalantly said it was because there seemed to be a high concentration of monsters there. If any monster appeared, they could deal with it. Still in acting mode, the protagonist asked if he could stick to a smaller area since he was afraid of holding Kim back. Kim allowed it and moved to the other side. However, as time passed and no monsters appeared, Kim grew frustrated and shouted for them to stop hiding. Meanwhile, Taejun, the protagonist, was already farming monsters in his area, collecting high-quality magic stones. Kim grew even more irritated when he realized the monsters were only appearing near Taejun. He briefly wondered if the protagonist had planned this, but dismissed the thought, believing him to be too inexperienced for such foresight. Frustrated, Kim resorted to using his area-wide taunt ability, yelling for the monsters to stop hiding and come out. Taejun smiled, his expression turning downright psychotic as he saw Kim use the taunt ability. We see a flashback where Sienna had explained Kim's ability outside the gate. She mentioned that while Kim wasn't particularly special as a melee hunter, his area-wide taunt was quite unique. Taejun had shown interest in this ability, but when questioned, he simply said he was curious. Back in the present, Taejun grinned as the map showed an overwhelming number of monsters being drawn in by Kim's taunt. This was exactly what he wanted, a massive farming opportunity. Kid and Mouse, surrounded by hordes of monsters, panicked and yelled for Taejun to stop watching and come help. Taejun coolly refused, saying he couldn't leave his designated area. Kim, overwhelmed, shouted again, demanding help. Taejun seized the moment. Enveloped in a blue aura, he used Phantom Step followed by the Ascending Dragon Strike. In one devastating move, he obliterated every zombie in the vicinity. Kim was stunned, questioning whether Taejun was truly a B-ranked hunter. After the dust settled, Taejun casually thanked Kim for his taunt ability, remarking that no one could have guessed the sheer number of monsters hiding in the area. He then revealed a mountain of high-quality magic stones he had collected just to rub salt in the wound. Kim, visibly shaken, suggested they leave now that they had secured the artifact. However, Taejun refused, saying they should help the others by gathering more magic stones. With a sly smile, Taejun politely asked Kim to use his taunt ability again. On the other side of the area, Sienna's group gathered with the other duo, and the 4 of them stayed together. Both groups managed to collect some crystals, and thanks to Taejun, they were able to find all the artifacts. Because of everything he did, he managed to complete the mission Impressive Growth, which was exclusively his. The mission required him to master the abilities he had copied from Made, and he fully mastered the Ascending Dragon Fist, allowing him to use it at 100% power. The sharpshooter, in particular, was impressed by the number of crystals our protagonist gathered, as they couldn't even fit into a single inventory. To maintain his good guy image, he offered for them to take some, leaving Kim very surprised, but Miri even more so. Everyone declined, as it would be taking advantage of the protagonist's kindness since he had earned everything himself. However, he insisted, saying that everyone had worked hard and he already had plenty of stones. Kim had shared some with him earlier, so he was merely following his example. To confirm his point, he lightly threatened Kim by asking if he was right, and of course, Kim agreed. They all thanked both the protagonist and the big guy, and in the end, they started collecting the magical stones. Sienna, however, was lost in thought about the situation, as she didn't know exactly what the protagonist had done, but he had clearly succeeded. While all this was happening, Mary began began asking if the protagonist was okay with distributing magical stones, but he simply said it was all about image. The guy was simply the reincarnation of Lloyd, and nothing could convince me otherwise. Back at the Duke's castle, we see him greeting the hunters and thanking them for gathering the artifacts, as now, thanks to them, the cursed land could bloom with life. Siuna asked where they should offer the artifacts, and the Duke said they could give them to him since, as the lord of the land, he would make the offering himself. But this made the redhead thoughtful, and she asked an interesting question. When he first gave them the mission, he said he hadn't been able to protect the artifacts from the barbarians, and as a result, the sealed evil was released and killed everyone there. He confirmed this, but she continued with the truly important question: how did he survive? This made the atmosphere extremely tense, and the lord began laughing, saying she was indeed clever, and that most people would never notice this. However, it was already too late, as he had been regaining his power ever since they brought the artifacts into the castle. As he spoke, he removed the cloak he was wearing, revealing his true appearance. He also revealed himself as the secret boss, a high-ranking vampire Duke Duas, also known as the Great Evil, with an F+ danger level. Shannon explained how she had realized this. It was because in such a large dungeon, there was no final boss, which was very strange. Additionally, the artifacts didn't seem like they were meant to clear the dungeon, so it was a case of a duplicated mission, and if the artifacts were gathered by the Lord, another mission would begin. The protagonist could only think about how fascinating this was, as he had discovered what a duplicated mission meant. It was interesting to know that from the very beginning, that old man had been the final boss. The vampire extended his hand and ordered them to walk forward and offer the artifacts to witness his glorious resurrection. For some reason, the redhead began walking towards him carrying the artifacts. This left Taejun confused, asking what she was doing. If they hand over the artifacts, the old man would become even stronger. However, before he could finish his sentence, he was attacked from all sides by his own teammates. He managed to dodge all their attacks, logically realizing they were all under the effects of the evil eye's charm buff. Our protagonist was unaffected because of the obsidian he carried, which nullified the ability. This surprised the Duke, who asked if the protagonist was really resistant to his power. In response, Taejun simply flipped him off, saying he wasn't attracted to ancient vampires and that the Duke should try hitting on charming grandmas at a senior center. The vampire was of course enraged, but he said it didn't matter since he had managed to gather all the artifacts. That day, he would regain his immortal power and ordered everyone to tear Taejun to pieces. Taejun found the whole situation troublesome, with the vampire saying it didn't matter how strong he was, he would still have to fight his companions, and it would end in a tragic death at their hands. However, contrary to what the vampire expected, Taejun simply channeled energy into his middle finger and began flicking his teammates on the forehead, instantly knocking them out. Specifically with Kim, after flicking him, he followed up with a punch so powerful that there was a delay before Kim hit the ground. Walking towards the Duke, the protagonist asked if he wasn't being underestimated, saying that it was easier than eating pie and that he hadn't even suffered a scratch because physical abilities combined with magic were extremely useful. This situation left the vampire furious, and he trembled while ordering Siona to protect him until he recovered all his power. She obeyed, attacking the protagonist without hesitation. She was incredibly fast, managing to cut Taejun before he could even dodge. She was the only one he could knock out with a simple flick. Of course, if he used the ascending dragon fist, he would win immediately, but the damage caused to her would be fatal. As he thought about all of this, he kept barely dodging her attacks. The vampire in the background began to speak, saying that he finally understood. It was clear that the two of them were in love with each other. That explained why Taejun wasn't attacking her, and it would be a tragedy if one of them were to die at the hands of their beloved. Taejun's expression was literally, "Are you out of your mind, brother?" But as he stared at the vampire, asking what the hell he was talking about, Mary warned him to look at Siona, who had stopped moving, completely frozen. The protagonist realized that for some reason, the vampire's charm ability had weakened for a moment. Even the Duke looked confused, ordering her to move and kill Taejun. At this point, the vampire was absolutely convinced that they were in love. The protagonist also noticed that she had apparently reacted to what he had been saying. Strong emotions might break someone free from enchantment temporarily. Even without full certainty, it was worth a try. Suddenly, he began speaking, saying he wasn't sure how this would sound, but he had something he wanted to tell her for a long time. He asked if she remembered last Christmas when she gave him a wallet, saying that a man with a good wallet would attract a lot of money. The atmosphere grew strangely tender, but of course, our madman broke the mood by saying he had sold a wallet at the market. He wasn't supposed to sell it, but he was financially desperate and had no choice. Mary was visibly disappointed, staring at him, but Taejun was sure that her anger would keep her frozen for a while. He began shouting at the vampire, asking how he dared to touch his friends, and Taejun made it clear he would never let the vampire use that ability again. To achieve this, he cast the Taejun-style nullification strike and simply jabbed both his fingers into the vampire's eyes with dispel magic. The little vampire was desperate, commanding the protagonist to remove his fingers from his eye right at that moment, but our madman simply said that he wouldn't do it and would continue as he was until death. The structure of the vampire's ability began to be calculated as he screamed, and once it reached 100%, the ability was completely nullified. Thanks to this, the Duke managed to free himself, but the damage to his eyes remained, and of course he was confused about what the Proto had done to his eyes. But he realized that this was done to break his powers once the people who were unconscious began to wake up. But this didn't make sense to him, as no one had ever been able to do this. It could only happen if at some point his mana had run out. Furious and confused, he asked again how our Proto had done it. But our madman is clever and simply asked why he should care, since he was going to die anyway, so he didn't need to know. Then he started mocking even more, saying that if he was really curious, he could just look it up in a wiki. But he couldn't do that while dead. Clearly, the Duke was getting angrier, thinking about how our Proto dared to joke around to the limit, but he wanted to see how long he would keep that smile on his face, stating that the one who would die wouldn't be him but the protagonist. He shouted that he wanted to put a death on Taejun's smile as he began to run towards him with a sword made of blood. But before he could get close, the redhead appeared, delivering a strike that severed the hand holding the sword, and she quickly took the opportunity to say that the protagonist had done well and could leave the rest of them. She shouted to everyone else that this was their chance since he couldn't use any more mental abilities and they should all unite their strength to defeat the vampire together. Everyone began charging their abilities while Sina stood facing him, preventing him from doing anything, making the vampire even more furious, screaming and asking if they really thought they could defeat him. During all this, our protagonist was simply watching, quietly saying that he would be defeated by the creatures he called pathetic. And just beside the protagonist, No Youngshul appeared, firing 2 shots, saying that he had been waiting for the right moment and wouldn't be a burden to the group. Both shots hit the vampire, injuring him clearly. Meanwhile, up front with Siona, Chui Yushik was battling the vampire, preventing him from using abilities, and healer Yuna Yang was healing the injuries of the companions that appeared during the battle. While the other 3 held off the vampire, our favorite redhead was charging energy into her sword, and she began to say the following words: "Power of the storm that cuts the winds, echo of the thunder that divides the sky, become one with my sword." She then used her strongest ability, the devastating cut, which struck the vampire directly, and in the next scene he was split in half horizontally, with only his legs standing. The gunslinger asked if it was over already, tired, but our protagonist appeared, telling him not to dare say it was over, simply launching his ultimate attack, the Kamehameha, at 100% power, a blue fireball that completely consumed the vampire's body and the region he was in, along with the artifacts. After finishing the ability, he said that he was Lee Taejin and would never lower his guard, even at the end. And while the Lord's charred body lay on the ground, Sena said it had been close, as she knew something was wrong with the Lord, but she hadn't expected him to be able to use mental control. The gunslinger said that when he regained his senses, the protagonist was pulling the vampire's eyes out, congratulating him for reading the Duke's abilities. But the protagonist asked if they didn't remember exactly what had happened, and even though the redhead asked why he wanted to know, he simply said it was for no particular reason, though we know he didn't want her to remember what he had said to her. And since the gate to leave had already opened, they could go back and have a barbecue together to celebrate as they deserved it. The redhead was the only one who remembered Kim looking for him, but he was still lying on the ground like trash. And of course, she asked if the protagonist had anything to explain, but he said it didn't matter. Unfortunately, it wasn't a serious injury, so he would be fine. Therefore, they were going to leave immediately, and the healer asked if the protagonist would like to join them for the barbecue. However, he said that he had some things to do, and Siona directly asked if there was any other plan beyond them. But it wasn't anything major, he just wanted to explore the dungeon, as it was very different from the others, and he wasn't sure when he would be able to enter one like this again, so he wanted to analyze it closely. It was like a form of training. Everyone admired this thought from our prota, and especially the redhead said that he was always full of energy, and she truly admired his dedication, both in the past and now. But she approached him and placed her hand on his face, asking him not to overdo it. She then stepped back, saying that he could call them when he was done, as they would be out until late, and finally they stepped out of the portal. Mary, who was no fool, immediately started asking what our prota was really going to do, since he definitely wasn't going to study the dungeon like he had said. The protagonist said that she really knew him well, but stated that in the past he indeed had moments like that where he dedicated himself a lot, either to try to be a bit better or just to survive. But at that moment she was right, he just wanted to see one thing on the parsley navigation, and he pointed to a question mark symbol in the middle of the castle. With another exaggerated expression, he approached her, saying they should go explore. Following the map, they eventually reached the library area, and Mary commented that nothing seemed strange in that place, but she was sure there was something there. Following parsley, our protagonist began using what he had learned from books and movies, which is the famous secret shelf hidden by the mechanism of a book. After a few attempts, he actually managed to open a secret passage. He was already excited about the treasure he would find inside, so he walked ahead without thinking, and this carelessness triggered a trap mechanism, nearly piercing him. Mary even tried to warn him, but he was too fast, and to finish, she said there were many traps in that area according to the map, and even though he could identify them, it was as if they were completely hidden within the dungeon. So the exact locations were not visible, and our prota simply said that he never expected he would need to use something like this, but the moment was perfect, and he pulled out the lich staff from his inventory. He waved it, emitting a purple aura, and said to listen to his call and appear, Iratus. While he calls for Iratus, Mary is visibly surprised as the big naked skeleton rises from the ground. He emerges honorably, introducing himself as the Herald of Death and addressing our protagonist as the Great Summoner, saying he'd come directly from the ends of the world. However, he's wearing a skirt that resembles Broly's from Dragon Ball, and it's clear he wouldn't show much respect for our protagonist, who had been a jerk to him. Iratus shouts, realizing that it was indeed our protagonist who summoned him. Our cheeky protagonist casually welcomes him, saying it's good to see him again, and asks how the skeleton has been. Iratus tries to ignore the question, and instead demands an explanation, asking how this is possible, and if the protagonist had really used his staff to summon him. To tease him further, the protagonist confirms it with a smug grin and even asks if Iratus liked it, saying his staff was very handy. For Iratus, this was clearly a lie, as his staff was filled with so many malicious souls that it would be impossible to use. These souls would crawl out and take over anyone trying to wield it, but Taejin just mocks him, saying he had already killed the spirit within it. Iratus still doesn't believe him, saying it's impossible. Taejin simply shrugs and complains that the spirit was a hassle but ultimately insignificant. Then he shifts focus, questioning how Iratus dared to speak to his master in such a tone. He bonks Iratus on the head with the staff, warning that it doesn't matter how he was summoned. If he dared to talk like that again, he'd end up as bone soup. Poor Iridas has no choice but to comply, saying he won't repeat the mistake. Taejin recalls that Iridas has always spoken that way but ignores it for now. Taejin orders Iridas to obey and gives him his first command, to follow the clearly safe path ahead. Of course, Iridas, knowing it's a trap, questions whether he really has to go forward unarmed and unable to see. But with a thinly veiled threat about disappointing his commander, the skeleton trembles and rushes forward as fast as he can. Unfortunately, he triggers a trap and barely makes it 6 steps before being smashed into pieces by a massive stone wall. Unsurprisingly, he's obliterated and the system window pops up, notifying Taejin that Iridas has been despawned. Mary, horrified, looks on, but Taejin nonchalantly checks the map, pleased that one of the traps has been identified. Only the rest remain. After marking the trap on the map, he casually raises the staff and summons Iridas again, as his work isn't done. Iridas responds, awkwardly piecing himself back together, still confused about what just happened. Once again, Taejin commands him to advance without stopping. This time, Iridas triggers another trap after a few steps and is incinerated. The system pops up again to announce that Iridas has turned to ashes and been despawned. Taejin celebrates marking another trap on the map. Mary asks if he really plans to keep doing this until every trap is cleared. Taejin, unconcerned, confirms it, asking if there's a problem with his method. He then reaffirms his philosophy, saying his name is Lee Taejin, and he shows no mercy to those who try to kill him. Mary wisely stays quiet in her corner, not wanting to be next. Taejin summons Iridas yet again, scolding him to stop slacking off and move forward because there are still plenty of traps to uncover. Time passes, and the sound of Iridas screaming echoes throughout the area. Half of his body is left lying on the ground while Taejin stands in front, praising his excellent work. Taejin tells Iridas that he's the best trap detector he could have asked for. Still alive, Iridas groans, asking why he hasn't been despawned yet. The system provides an explanation. After dying so many times and enduring repetitive blows, Iridas' durability has increased significantly, allowing him to persist. Taejin muses to himself that Iridas isn't dying as easily to the traps anymore. He considers that summoned creatures typically don't evolve just from dying a few times. This must be an effect of the explosive growth mechanism. Taejin remarks aloud how impressive Iridas has become, making the skeleton genuinely happy to receive praise. But Taejin leaves him behind, thinking he'll need to examine the explosive growth mechanism more closely after they leave this place. Iridas is irritated, feeling disrespected as Taejin walks off after giving him nothing more than a simple good job. To Iridas, this is outrageous. Even immortals have rights, and Taejin should acknowledge them. But Taejin dismisses it, withdrawing the summoning and putting the staff back in his inventory, saying they should refocus on treasure hunting. Mary, watching this unfold, quietly realizes how truly heartless Taejin is. She points out that there don't seem to be any more traps or paths, so this is likely a dungeon's end. As Mary asks if Taejin suspects anything here, he replies that the massive tombstone he's been staring at looks suspicious. Usually, tombstones aren't that enormous, and he's right, it's ridiculously large. Taejin adds that there's no reason to build something that big unless something is hidden inside. The moment he touches it, pink squares with strange symbols begin appearing across its surface. The massive tombstone splits in half, revealing a gigantic, helmetless suit of armor holding a small box. Inside the box lies a bracelet. Taejin recognizes the bracelet's design as being made from the relics they encountered on their earlier mission. However, this particular bracelet doesn't seem to be tied to any mission. The best he can do is evaluate its worth. It's likely very valuable. He starts praying to any deity listening, hoping the item is of a high class. While he's praying, Mary asks why he hasn't just used the system's item analyzer. Taejin freezes, dumbfounded, and asks her to explain what she just said. Mary explains that the item analyzer is a simple system feature that allows users to quickly and efficiently analyze items. It's such an essential tool that everyone from other dimensions considers it indispensable. She asks if he likes it, but Taejin, annoyed, yells at her for not telling him about it earlier. Mary snaps, shouting that she's already installed several system functions for him, and it's not her fault he didn't pay attention when she explained them. Taejin sheepishly admits he wasn't listening earlier and decides to give the analyzer a try. When used, the analyzer reveals the item, the Relic of Malice. It's now bound to Taejin and grants him 2 abilities along with +1 to all stats. The abilities are Vampire Aesthetics and Vampire Charm. This is incredible since it's a unique ranked item with 2 powerful abilities. Vampire Aesthetics, ranked A, prevents any wounds from staying on Taejin's body for long. It's an advanced healing ability but has limitations. Can't heal severe cuts or fractures. As a passive skill, it doesn't consume mana. Vampire Charm, also ranked A, allows Taejin to enchant a target by consuming 50 mana. However, it won't work on individuals with mental defense above rank B or those who aren't weakened. While Taejin celebrates his new passive healing ability, Mary marvels at the usefulness of enchanting humans, noting how valuable it could be. Taejin, with his usual psychopathic grin, asks why it wouldn't be useful. Humans are everywhere and can be incredibly handy. Mary grows uneasy as Taejin casually considers using the ability on people. But Taejin simply tells her she doesn't understand humans. In his view, humans can be more terrifying than any dungeon creature. Meanwhile, someone is watching them from a distance, communicating via radio. They confirm that the target has been located. The other person on the radio notes that the target recently reached rank B and shouldn't pose much of a challenge for the observer's stealth abilities. This individual possesses the rank S skill Silent Shadow. Our protagonist, however, senses something is off. The assassin, using their skill, stands directly in front of him. The assassin notes how Taejin was previously just a rank D doorman, a fractured individual, and now is a promising talent climbing to rank B. see. As the assassin prepares to stab Taejun unnoticed, he receives a brutal kick to the face. Taejun, confused, wonders if the navigation system could be malfunctioning. The kick reveals the assassin, confirming that he was there all along, though Taejun still couldn't see him through navigation alone. The assassin panics, realizing Taejun isn't just some low-ranked fluke. Taejun, on the other hand, wonders aloud if the man truly has invisibility and orders him to stop hiding and show himself for a conversation. To encourage compliance, Taejun threatens to keep beating him until he dies if he doesn't reveal himself. As our protagonist had said himself, if he didn't show up, he was going to get beaten, and that's exactly what happened. A kick landed on his back so hard he felt like a soccer ball afterward. Following the kick, there was a barrage of punches, reminiscent of JoJo, with him unleashing an ore on the poor guy. After taking such a beating, the guy started begging for forgiveness, apologizing profusely to the protagonist and asking for mercy, just this once. However, our sarcastic protagonist casually remarked that he hadn't even started yet, adding that kids these days lacked courage. Now that the guy had shown himself, the protagonist started asking where he was from and what his name was. The poor fellow, all beaten up with 2 bumps on his head resembling Mickey Mouse ears from the hits, introduced himself as Han Jong-chul of the Red Dogs Guild. Our protagonist recognized the name as familiar and remembered that the Red Dogs were a group of criminal scumbags who extorted money to kill hunters. Holding the pitiful man, well, not really pitiful since he's a scumbag, by the collar, the protagonist asked what had brought someone so notorious to a place like this. Terrified, the man pleaded for his life, saying he was only following orders, but the protagonist coldly replied that following orders still made him responsible. Mocking him, the protagonist nicknamed the group Hot Dogs and said he had a few questions for the man while gathering energy in his hand, preparing to use the vampire's charm. He warned the man to answer carefully while staring at him with a psychopathic glare. While the man screamed inside the room, the scene shifted outside where the rest of his group was gathered in the cemetery. The apparent leader of the team was wondering why the invisible man hadn't returned yet, as it shouldn't have taken this long to deal with a simple rank B. This leader was called Han Jong-pil. The leader muttered that next time he would handle it personally. But the weird guy in the L pose, who was listening to a playlist, said not to be too hard on the newbie since he lacked field experience, and that taking time was somewhat normal. After all, no one's perfect on their first mission. This strange guy was named Ham Jang Seo, whom I'll affectionately nickname Paraguayan L. As Paraguayan L insisted that the rookie would improve one day, our protagonist appeared out of nowhere, carrying the invisible man's body. He began addressing the 3 brothers by name, mocking them for being awakened hunters who joined forces to do dirty work. He didn't hesitate to hit a nerve, saying that if their late parents knew about this, they'd cry tears of blood over how pathetic they become. A scar-faced Jong-pil grabbed a bat and demanded to know how the protagonist knew such personal details. Had he interrogated the youngest brother? The protagonist calmly confirmed that he'd come personally to extract information from the 2 older brothers, since the youngest one had been less than cooperative. Paraguayan L tried to snap back and insult the protagonist, but the scar-faced Jong-pil silenced him, stating that the invisible man was still a trained professional with years of experience who wouldn't give up information easily. He concluded that the protagonist must have used some kind of mind-contaminating magic. Taejun sarcastically applauded the brothers' unwavering trust in each other, saying it was touching and offered them a praise sticker before flipping them off. Unsurprisingly, the brothers got furious and accused him of being insane. The leader admitted he had underestimated the little psychopath and should have dealt with him from the start. He warned the protagonist not to think he'd walk away alive. Taejun, unimpressed, taunted him to try. The man then unveiled his supposedly impressive skill, a special assassination technique honed over years of training, the Shadow Strike. Unfortunately for him, the audience never saw the move in action because Taejun knocked him out cold with 1 punch. Taejun complained that he didn't have time for such long-winded speeches and moved on to Paraguayan L, who was now trembling. Taejun, low on mana, told him he'd better spill everything unless he wanted to end up like his brothers. The scene then shifted to the Hunter Alliance headquarters, where it was explained that the Red Dogs villains had been taken into custody. The Alliance's HQ had uncovered their plot. They had disguised themselves as dungeon regulars to ambush Taejun. When he didn't leave the dungeon as expected, they entered to carry out the assassination themselves. The Alliance's vice leader was now talking to Taejun and Mata. She admitted they had been careless as they already knew Taejun would be targeted again after the rank B evaluation scandal. Provisions had been made, but they never imagined the villains would infiltrate a Myth Guild dungeon. Taking full responsibility, she apologized, but Taejun reassured her there was no need to apologize since he had anticipated this would happen. It just came sooner than expected. Mata, however, couldn't contain his anger. He was livid that the villains had targeted not only Kang Jian and Yu Se-rin, but also Taejun. To him, this was utterly unacceptable. He vowed to storm the Red Dogs' headquarters and beat them until they confessed who had hired them. But Taejun calmly said there was no need for that since he already knew who had ordered the hit. Yin, the vice leader, asked if Taejun had really uncovered the truth on his own. Mata, surprised, questioned whether the villains had been that quick to talk. Taejun casually replied that they were far more talkative than he expected. With an intimidating look, Yin demanded to know who's the bastard that dared to attack Yu Se-rin, Kang Jian, and Taejun himself. Her aura flared so intensely that even Mary was left speechless. Taejun revealed the culprit, Seon Guild's leader, Ba Hyun-soo. The 2 guild representatives were shocked. They hadn't expected it to be Hyun-soo. Meanwhile, the hot-headed Maddie began shouting that it was obvious Hyun-soo was behind it, as his villainous appearance practically screamed guilt. Yin, however, analyzed the situation. Seon Guild was a national guild that had jumped from 30th to 7th in the rankings over the past 2 years. They were notorious for doing whatever it took to rise in the rankings, no matter how cruel or inhumane. With confirmation from Taejun, Yen declared there was no doubt left. She announced she'd gather her guild's elite members and ensure Seon paid for targeting the prodigy hunters. As she and Maddie prepared to march, Taejun asked if he could come along. He wanted to look the the man who tried to kill him in the eye. The scene then shifted to Seon Guild's headquarters, where chaos had erupted. Mate burst through walls, shouting for Hyun-soo, while guild members demanded to know what he thought he was doing. Meanwhile, Yeon entered from another direction, ordering the members to bring their leader immediately. Behind her was an army, all exuding an intimidating green aura. She warned that if they didn't produce their leader soon, the entire building would burn to the ground. When the guild members tried to talk instead of acting, Yeon ordered her elites to attack, and they unleashed fireballs, creating a massive explosion. One sane guild member ran to Hyun-soo's office to warn him, saying the blue sky and Hwoarang representatives were there. But Hyun-soo, hacking his bags full of gold and money, told him to shut up. He cursed himself for hiring such incompetent fools and wondered where it had all gone wrong. Was it the rank B evaluation or hiring the Red Dogs? Either way, if not for Taejin, none of this would have happened. He planned to escape, convinced that not even the guild leaders could break through his vault door. But then he heard a loud bang. Through a crack in the vault door, he saw a terrifying sight. Taejin peeking through, asking if this was where he had been hiding all along and whether he really thought he wouldn't be found. Hyun-soo panicked, recognizing him instantly. As he stammered to ask if it was really Taejin, the young hunter confirmed, introducing himself as a rank B hunter and saying, "Consider this my respectful greeting." The leader begins questioning how our protagonist managed to get there. However, the protagonist simply claims he walked, since he's very skilled at finding people, while Parsley, who's navigating below, gives a thumbs up to the camera. Hyun-soo questions what the protagonist wants, asserting that he couldn't have come there in secret without expecting something in return. He asks if it's money, showing a briefcase stuffed with cash, and tells the protagonist he can take it and leave. He promises there's more where that came from if he just walks away. Mary warns Taejin not to fall for the schemes of this crook. Back to reality, the protagonists agree it's a tempting offer, but make it clear they're not after dirty money. Instead, they want to confirm something with Seom's leader about the promotion exam, asking if someone else was involved. The protagonist claims they already know most of the details, so Hyun-soo should just be honest. Hyun-soo grows visibly irritated, accusing Taejin of testing him. He insists he devised the entire plan alone, mockingly asking who else would be involved. The protagonist taunts him, hinting that he played a card to bait Hyun-soo, but admits he didn't fall for it. The protagonist jokes that he'll just beat Hyun-soo up and hand him over to the headquarters since he refuses to talk. Of course, as the leader of a powerful guild like Seon, Hyun-soo is no weakling. He demands to know who the protagonist thinks he is, calling him arrogant for showing up as if he were somebody important. Hyun-soo claims not to fear the protagonist, a mere doorman, but admits to fearing the two monsters, Mate and Yeon-hwa. As he speaks, Hyun-soo channels energy into his hands, manifesting dark matter. Even Taejin is momentarily impressed. Seeing the protagonist's reaction, Hyun-soo asks if he's ready to talk now, remarking that this whole situation could have been avoided if he'd accepted the initial offer. Feigning ignorance, the protagonist sarcastically asks if he should have accepted the deal. Meanwhile, he analyzes the dark matter ability, realizing its immense power. As a rank S ability, dark matter absorbs all energy except that of the conjurer, blocks range attacks, and drains mana and stamina in close combat, making it nearly impossible to approach. Hyun-soo orders the protagonist to step aside if he doesn't want to die. Normally, anyone sane would avoid such a fight, but the protagonist? Sane? Hardly. Instead, he accuses Hyun-soo of lying, claiming the ability is fake. Even Hyun-soo starts to believe the protagonist is insane, questioning if he's really planning to counter dark matter with a mere fireball. Unfazed, the protagonist doubles down, mocking Hyun-soo and claiming he's fooling no one. We finally understand the protagonist's confidence. He's using his unique ability to analyze Hyun-soo's status window, revealing that the dark matter is just a skill projection ability. It consumes mana to replicate a random skill, but operates at only 10% of the original skill's power. When the protagonist throws the fireball, Hyun-soo panics, raising his hands in surrender and begging to talk. But it's too late. The fireball hits, leaving Hyun-soo screaming in pain, pleading for someone to bring an extinguisher. Despite holding back, the protagonist is surprised at Hyun-soo's low endurance and wonders how such a person became a guild leader. Taejin tells Hyun-soo to stop making so much noise since he won't die from this. Concluding they've talked enough, the protagonist grabs Hyun-soo's head and uses his vampire charm ability to extract the truth. As the protagonist reaches for Hyun-soo's face, the scene cuts to the Seon Guild building, now wrecked with missing parts. Mate is shouting congratulations to the protagonist for capturing Hyun-soo, calling him 100 times more competent than the useless headquarters staff. The protagonist humbly credits the two leaders, claiming he couldn't have accomplished it without them. It's thanks to their support that Hyun-soo is apprehended. Mate agrees, boasting about their abilities. He points out that the building might have collapsed without their intervention. Taejin acknowledges Mate's strength, but asks about the guild master, Soo-yeon. Mate reassures him she'll arrive soon as she's retrieving evidence from the office. Conveniently, a portal, resembling something out of Rick and Morty, appears just as he finishes speaking. Soo-yeon emerges with evidence of exam tampering. According to the documents, several high-ranking management officials were involved, though they fled abroad. Mate, having suspected as much, asks if there's evidence implicating other hunters or guilds. Soo-yeon confirms that the exam manipulation was orchestrated solely by Hyun-soo and his subordinates. Mate laments the greed of those willing to accept money from someone like Hyun-soo, blaming him for the corruption. Grabbing Hyun-soo by the ear, Mate declares he won't hand him over to headquarters so easily and promises to change his mind today. Hyun-soo screams for mercy, but no one intervenes. Yeon speaks with Taejin, asking if he captured Hyun-soo in his underground hideout. After confirming, she admits they owe him once again. She never expected to need his help for something like this, yes. However, the protagonist denies this, stating he acted entirely on his own to uncover hidden forces behind the events. His comment confuses Yeon, but he elaborates that the exam tampering couldn't have been orchestrated by Hyun-soo alone. With elite dark magic users and professional assassins involved, a larger force must be backing him. He vows to dismantle not only Hyun-soo's empire, but also everyone who supported him. He gives a righteous speech declaring that wrongdoers must be punished. Mary rolls her eyes at his blatant posturing, while Yeon is genuinely surprised by his determination. Yeon asks if he's identified the villains helping Hyun-soo. He denies it but stares at her suspiciously. The scene shifts to a dark office lit only by a laptop screen. A man nervously reads the news about Ba Hyun-soo's arrest, learning that he confessed to tampering with the promotion test 2 days after being captured. The man curses Hyun-soo for confessing, questioning why he hired assassins and did things be. This man, Go Young-min, is the leader of the hard-to-pronounce Hwaryeon Guild, which we'll simply call the Skull Guild due to its symbol. Young-min is anxious, wondering if this will lead back to him, but dismisses the possibility. They only signed a contract and a sealing spell ensures their involvement remains hidden. As he ponders, someone knocks on the door. It's the Skull Guild's vice leader, Cho Young-tae, who reports someone wants to meet Young-min personally. Go asks if it's someone from Sky or Hworing Guild, fearing he's doomed. Young-tae says the person is wearing a mask, making identification impossible, but mentioned the flying fly, which Go recognizes immediately. Panicking, Young-min tells him to let the person in. He fears Hyun-soo may have revealed details of their dealings but doubts it. The masked visitor enters, removing their disguise to reveal none other than the protagonist, Lee Taejin, the madman himself. Both men recognize him from the Rank B test, where his interference caused them to fail in eliminating Seirin and Jian. The leader asks why the rising star would visit their guild, inviting him to sit. Internally, Go speculates that Taejin has come to blackmail him over the Hyun-soo deal. However, breaking everyone's expectations, including our own. Taejin starts laughing maniacally, performing a handstand while spinning his head and spitting everywhere. The leader, understandably shocked, orders Young-tae to stop the protagonist's bizarre antics. Our protagonist has lost it. He starts running around the room with his arms. Yes, you read that right, running with his arms. This bizarre behavior even scares Miri, who begins to question if he's lost his mind as he's acting like a lunatic. While he's busy mocking everyone in the office, the vice leader of the guild charges toward him, channeling energy into his fist to land a punch. He demands to know what the hell is wrong with the protagonist for barging into someone's building and behaving like a complete maniac. Young-tae attempts to strike him, but with an agile maneuver using just his legs, the protagonist intercepts the punch with ease. The blow doesn't faze him at all, and to mock further, he even comments that it's exactly what he'd expect from the #1 of the Skull Guild. Even the bald vice leader is impressed. Taejin used nothing but raw physical strength to completely neutralize the attack, all while intentionally choosing a technique that momentarily restricted the vice leader's movement. The protagonist announces that the test should be over and introduces himself in a more formal manner. Returning to a more human position, albeit in a slightly contorted way, he presents himself as Lee Taejin, the rugby hunter and freelancer. The guild leader is understandably confused, questioning what on earth Taejin is talking about. He barged in, spouted nonsense about testing them, and now expects them to accept it. But our little psycho merely confirms it, explaining that of course he needs to assess the strongest person in the guild he's about to join. He's testing how they would handle the unexpected. Jeo Young-min, the guild leader, begins to realize just how insane this guy is. Even the bald vice leader is at his limit, claiming he's seen all kinds of lunatics. But even lunacy has its boundaries. Poking his finger at the protagonist's chest, he reminds him that this is not the kind of place where anyone can stroll in and say whatever nonsense comes to mind. And worse, Taejun doesn't even know the basics of necromancy. Unbothered, Taejun jokes about how obsessed they are with necromancy, and remarks that this fixation is precisely why the Skull Guild is failing. The bald man's anger boils over. Taejun continues, pointing out that the Skull Guild was founded by the legendary hunter Go Junho, who used blood magic. He revolutionized dark magic and necromancy, transforming them into symbols of national support. Thanks to him, the guild once ranked among Korea's top 5. However, ever since the original guild master retired, the guild has been on the brink of collapse. These statements infuriate the vice leader even further, but he can't deny them. Faced with the harsh truth, he realizes that they can't afford to be too picky in desperate times. There's an old saying about turning crises into opportunities. Taejun, sitting on the guild leader's desk, mentions that this is one of those moments, a chance to transform a crisis into an opportunity. If they accept him into the Skull Guild, he guarantees they will rise again from the ashes. Jeo Young-min, visibly conflicted, knows how risky this could be. But then Taejun hands him something, a document that changes everything. When the guild leader looks at the paper, his expression shifts to sheer panic. Though he brushes it off as unimportant when the vice leader asks, it's clear Taejun knows everything about the artifact used to manipulate the B-rank exam and even about the shady transactions between Jeo and Hyun-soo. Realizing the depth of Taejun's knowledge, Jeo finally concedes, signing the contract and addressing Taejun as their newest member. Later, alone with the vice leader, the bald man explodes with rage over the decision to admit someone who doesn't even practice necromancy into the guild. But Jeo simply asks him to calm down. He acknowledges that Taejun is highly skilled and will be incredibly useful to their guild. The vice leader is far from convinced, dismissively saying, "Useful my ass." He insists Taejun is clearly here just to exploit them. Still, he leaves one warning. Taejun better learn necromancy no matter what. Otherwise, he'll have to face the special admission test. Back at Taejun's home, he finally feels at peace, enjoying a rare moment of relaxation. Even something as simple as a cup of coffee brings him joy. Ever cheerful, Miri comments on how great his life seems now, especially considering he used to have assassins targeting him. But she suggests he should remain cautious. Naturally, Taejun assures her he has a plan. He's never idle, and he always prepares for any potential situation. Miri doubts this, suspecting he's bluffing. Taejun, however, shows her her a ring he took from the Red Dogs gang members. This ring, he explains, is the reason they managed to pull off so many jobs without getting caught. Once he puts it on, it alters his appearance for everyone around him. While advanced detection abilities might still see through the disguise, most people will know it's him. This allows him to roam freely without worry. Taejin asks Mary to simply enjoy the peaceful moment with him. Still curious, Mary asks why he chose to join the Skull Guild when he had better options like Myth, Hwoaring, or Sky. Taejin explains that while those guilds are great, working for them would be exhausting. Constant international expeditions, political conferences, and other annoyances come with being part of the Big Three. Joining one of them would bring too much hassle. On the other hand, the Skull Guild, ranked only 22nd nationally, doesn't attract much attention. This means he can collect mana stones in peace. Besides, he slyly remarks he can renegotiate the terms of his contract whenever he wants. He's already secured 100% of the commission for mana stones for himself. Genius. Mary finally understands his reasoning but wonders what he plans to do next. Taejin, who hasn't been out in a while, is considering going shopping. Mary is shocked as he's usually so frugal, but Taejin believes it's okay to splurge occasionally and enjoy the fruits of his labor. Arriving in a massive glass building, Taejin is amazed. He never imagined visiting a place like this and marvels at how money truly changes lives. Mary, unfamiliar with this world, asks what kind of place it is as it doesn't seem like an ordinary shopping mall. With a flourish, Taejin explains that this is the world's largest market for hunters, known and coveted by hunters everywhere. It's called Gwynwol-jeon, Korea's mega market exclusively for hunters. This isn't just a shopping mall. It boasts a VIP area, a cultural center, entire floors dedicated to weapons, armor, and accessories, as well as grand halls for parties and events. Rare equipment arrives every week, all of the highest quality and with effects Mary could never have imagined. Presenting this information like a TV commercial, Taejin earns applause from Miri. While he's contemplating all the treasures he can explore, a car pulls up and someone calls out to him. The person, barely recognizing him thanks to his ring, introduces herself as Cha Yerin, the leader of the Myth Guild. She mentions she's heard about him through her brother and didn't expect to meet him so soon. Taejin asks who she is, and she explains her role. Shaking her hand, he asks what brings a guild leader to a place like this. She surprises him by revealing she owns the entire mega market and personally comes by weekly to inspect the newest arrivals. Taejin is floored. He had no idea Myth owned the whole market, and if he'd known, he would have joined their guild without hesitation. After apologizing for not recognizing her, Yerin reassures him it's fine. She doesn't appear in the media much, so it's normal for people not to know her face. She then asks if Taejin has any free time, as she'd like to thank him personally. Apparently, she's heard from her brother about Taejin's role in the Cursed Territory expedition. The hunters said that without him, they wouldn't have completed the dungeon, and the entire third team, and possibly Myth itself, would have been in danger. While Taejin appreciates her gratitude, he politely declines any rewards, explaining that he didn't do it for recognition. Yerin respects his humility but offers one final gesture. She invites him to select any item he desires from the VIP area. As she shows off the golden card, our protagonist is left speechless, recognizing this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. However, she begins to put the card away, saying there's nothing she can do if he truly doesn't want a reward. But all he can think is that any free item is highly advantageous. Without hesitation, he places his hand on her shoulder just as she is about to leave and asks her to wait for a moment, requesting to take a quick look at what they have. Inside the elevator, she comments that he is much more ordinary than she expected. She initially thought he would have a more unique vibe, especially considering the incredible aura he seemed to emanate and the rumors spreading about him. Embarrassed, the protagonist awkwardly admits that he might have accidentally raised her expectations. She reassures him, saying it wasn't a bad thing. In fact, she prefers that he is down to earth. However, she jokingly adds that Shamana probably wouldn't appreciate her saying that. As she finishes speaking, the elevator doors open and she explains that this area is reserved exclusively for VIP customers. However, since this is a special occasion, he can look around freely and take his time choosing something. The space is truly magnificent with white decor, some paintings, and endless corridors. The protagonist is amazed, staring at necklaces and armors worth billions of won, and marvels even more at the fact that she owns all of this, seeing her as a sort of goddess of money. He even begins to drool, prompting Yerin to ask if he's found anything interesting. Of course he has, it's just hard to choose among so many options. But one item truly catches his eye. Pointing to a specific section, he asks if she could explain what those items do. Impressed by his taste, she tells him that every item in that section was once used by legendary guild masters like Hwoaring and Shinonyen, both of whom were legends in Korea and are now too old to wield these artifacts. She explains that these items are preserved as tributes to their stories and, unfortunately, are not for sale. She suggests he look at other items instead since there are even better ones available. However, their conversation is interrupted by a man informing Yerin that the director of the Hayonen Guild has arrived. Yerin remarks on how she hadn't realized how much time had passed and says she has an urgent meeting to attend. She suggests meeting later in her office to continue their discussion. The protagonist politely bids her farewell and urges her not to worry, but Miri teases him, saying he'll hurt his back bowing so deeply. The protagonist responds that it's all part of being a professional. Miri, however, remains puzzled about why Taejin is so interested in something like these gauntlets when there are so many better options available. She peers through the glass, trying to discern what might be special about them, but they seem far too old to be of any real use. Using a scanner, they identify the item as the Broken Steel Dragon Gauntlet. Its durability has reached 0, and it was once used by a forgotten martial artist. With its durability completely worn down, the gauntlet has become useless. Mary isn't wrong about that, but Taejin has noticed something intriguing about this item. It has a tab indicating synergy with the skills of the Ascendant Dragon. Additionally, there's an interesting mission related to explosive growth. Based on his understanding, the system never gives him an impossible task. At the very least, the system always provides challenges within his capabilities. This mission involves finding an item that creates synergy with his abilities, which will will unlock a new tab in his status window. Thus, there must be a way to repair this item. But since he has no way to acquire it for now, he begins to complain that he'd do anything to fix it, even saying he'd bark like a dog if she asked him to in exchange for the gauntlet. To everyone's surprise, he actually starts imitating a dog and then lies down on the ground, contemplating ways to win her over and secure the item. His ears perk up when he overhears a conversation in the next room. Someone asks about a matter they thought had already been resolved, mentioning that the additional contract fee had already been paid. Recognizing the voice as Yurin's, Taejun senses an opportunity. If she's in some kind of trouble, he figures he might score some points with her by solving it. With that in mind, he starts running toward her like a loyal dog, determined to help. In the meeting room, Yurin expresses her frustration, disappointed because they had already discussed this matter beforehand. She asks how long the other party plans to act so stubbornly. The leader of the Hayomen Guild, Kang Yong-sik, responds by praising her for being a bold businesswoman, but notes that her words are harsh. He and his guild insist they are charging a fair price for their high standards and ask if she doesn't agree that it's only fair for them to do so. Yurin struggles to believe his audacity, but before she can respond, Taejun bursts into the room, having overheard their voices. He enters, asking if something is wrong. Kang immediately becomes enraged, demanding Taejun leave, not even bothering to learn who he is. Even Yurin advises Taejun that now isn't a good time, but he confidently ignores them, saying that if they're in the middle of an executive negotiation, he should be involved because he loves negotiations. He takes a seat and asks to discuss the deal. Grinning, he draws the ire of Kang, who demands to know who Taejun is. Yurin too is at a loss for words, but Taejun has already grasped the situation. He knows the Hayonen Guild specializes in item appraisal, and since there aren't many guilds in Korea that can perform such appraisals, Hayonen monopolizes the market. Even if they breach contracts or act disrespectfully, guilds like Myth have little choice but to comply with Hayonen's demands. Interrupting Yurin, who is struggling to explain him, Taejun introduces himself as Che Yurin's legal advisor. He asks directly what the issue is. Though Yurin is confused by his claim, Kang falls for it, believing Taejun really is her lawyer. Kang explains that Yurin had asked them to appraise a large volume of items in a single day. Given the quantity, they'd need at least a week, and bringing in more personnel would increase the costs, so they require an additional payment, double the originally agreed amount. While Yurin is shocked by the price, Taejun understands the problem but notices something strange. Since Hayonen is supposed to be a specialized appraisal guild, how could they need an entire week to evaluate such a small batch of items? He calls them out, sarcastically questioning how an expert guild could be so inefficient. Laughing, Taejun remarks that if he were Yurin, he would have sought out another guild long ago. Kang fires back, asking how he dares behave this way, and challenges them to find another guild, warning of the risks. If appraisals are inaccurate or mishandled, the items could lose their value or even be damaged. Kang emphasizes that there isn't another guild capable of handling such work. Taejun remains silent, expressionless, as Yurin places a hand on his shoulder, telling him it's enough. She appreciates that he's trying to help, but if the situation worsens, it won't be good for anyone. Taejun stands up, admitting that he may have overstepped and apologizing if he caused any trouble for Yurin. He begins to leave. Kang mockingly remarks that Taejun finally got the message, boasting that no one else can appraise items like they can. He urges Yurin to finalize the contract, but as Taejun walks away, he suddenly turns back, introducing himself with a grin as Yurin's new item appraiser and expressing his excitement about working with her in various ways. Yurin questions what our protagonist is doing since he looks like a lunatic with that strange monocle on his head, looking at the items he's supposed to evaluate. But he asks her not to worry since he wouldn't take more than an hour. She's confused while he simply asks the other evaluators to leave since all of this is a trade secret. Kang, logically, gets furious, saying this is all a farce and that he doesn't care if the protagonist is a lawyer or whatever. If he keeps interfering with business, there will be consequences. Kang tells him to stop pretending to be an item appraiser and go home, mocking him along with his subordinates about how Taejun doesn't even know how to bluff since evaluating so much in just an hour is impossible. But our protagonist simply picks up a necklace, asking if he could keep it for a moment. He says he already evaluated outside a little earlier, and the evaluation was done in under 10 seconds, asking if, at that pace, he could qualify as an appraiser too. To verify, Kang orders one of his evaluators to check, but the protagonist grabs the evaluator's hand, stating that one should only bet if they're sure, asking if they hadn't learned this before. He says he doesn't like being treated that way, then speaks directly to Kang, telling him that if he's sure he wants confirmation, you should put something on the line as well. Kang finds the situation amusing and asks if Taejun really wants to make a bet, finally understanding where this is going. Kang proposes that if Taejun fails to evaluate all the items in 1 hour, he'll lose. If he succeeds, Kang will lose and pay 1 billion won. Then he asks what Taejun will wager. Taejun, impressed by the bold offer, remarks on Kang's audacity. Kang, thinking he's intimidated him, asks if Taejun is backing out, scared of being exposed, saying it's not too late to admit his mistake and apologize. But Taejun confirms the deal, raising the stakes to 10 billion won, with that sly grin of someone who already knows they won the lottery. Yurin questions the protagonist's confidence in betting over 10 billion won to evaluate so many items in under an hour, asking how he could pay if he lost. But he reassures her, asking her to verify if the evaluation is complete, showing her a cloth. She uses some sort of verification and realizes the evaluation is indeed complete. It's an impenetrable cloak that nullifies one lethal blow every 48 hours and gives +1 to all stats. Shocked, she wonders how this is possible, and thanks to her reaction, the protagonist realizes his gamble was right. With his administrator's system's item analyzer, he can completely evaluate evaluate an item's details without separating it. He wasn't sure if it worked for others, but now he knows. All the analyses performed by the item analyzer can be shared with others, meaning he could make a fortune as an appraiser. Yeren asks if Taejin really did this, and he confirms, saying no one else could have done it. Furthermore, he claims to have evaluated all the other items on the table. He tells her to verify it herself if she doesn't believe him. She does, placing her hand over the items, and is shocked to find not just their names but their grades, stats, and abilities fully revealed. Even the country's top appraisers need hours to gather such information, but in an instant, everything had been unveiled. She wonders how Lee Taejin managed this. Kang is equally stunned, realizing all the items have been evaluated and questioning how this could be possible. The protagonist smirks and asks what happened to Kang, noticing he seems shaken. Taejin reminds Kang that he warned him not to bet unless he was sure, advising him to be more careful next time. Angered, Kang grabs Taejin, calling him a cheater and demanding to know what trick he used. Kang accuses Taejin of conspiring with Yeren, saying it's unbelievable. Yeren steps in, laying down the facts, stating that whether it's a lie or not, Kang can see for himself that all items were evaluated. Therefore, according to the contract, he owes Taejin 10 billion won. The protagonist casually agrees, saying Kang should just transfer the money to him. Kang, still in shock, struggles to process this since he isn't used to such a situation. It feels unreal to lose 10 billion won on a simple bet. His subordinates help him leave, trying to calm him down while the protagonist and Yeren are left alone. Taejin, with a mischievous grin, remarks on how rewarding the bet was. Yeren thanks him for his help, but she says this is something they can't simply overlook. She notes that with his level of precision and speed in evaluation, he could single-handedly upend the global appraisal industry and monopolize it. In other words, if he wanted to, he could destroy the current market that guilds like Hyonin rely on. She admits that even for him, it seems impossible and demands to know how he did it. Naturally feeling cornered, the protagonist brushes it off as a trade secret, saying he can't reveal it. Seizing the opportunity, he changes the subject, asking if she remembers the relic gauntlets they saw earlier. Since they weren't for sale, he proposes a trade. If she gives him the gauntlets, he'll give her a hint about how he evaluated the items. She comments on how much he must have liked that item, but agrees, saying the situation is an exception, and she'll personally retrieve the gauntlets for him right away. However, she insists he explain how he evaluated the items. A short moment later, we see him leaving, thanking the director, saying he'll visit again soon and looks forward to seeing her then. The protagonist walks off carrying a pile of shiny items while Yeren waves him goodbye. After he leaves, one of Yeren's bodyguards asks what she discovered. She recounts that he told her everything before leaving, saying his secret was that he listens to the voice of the items, advising her to look at them with the eyes of the heart. Of course, the bodyguard finds this absurd, and Yeren agrees, saying it's likely Taejin never intended to reveal the real secret, or that he's in a situation where he can't. Regardless of the reason, she vows that the hunter Taejin shouldn't think she'll let this slide so easily. One way or another, she'll ensure he joins her guild. Returning to our protagonist in his little home, he was acting like a lunatic, finally exclaiming that he had gotten his hands on that cursed gauntlet. With a manic grin, he spoke to the item, asking if it knew just how much effort it had taken to acquire it, and swearing he wouldn't let it go. Miri interrupted him, pointing out that no matter how legendary the item had been in the past, now it was just broken junk. She asked if there was any way to repair it. However, the protagonist admitted he had no clue whether it could be fixed. Still, now that the item was in his possession, he could surely come up with something. Mary suggested posting about it in the parsley market, since there were countless people from different dimensions there and perhaps someone might know how to repair it. But the protagonist cringed, remembering all his bad experiences with that platform, wondering if he'd really have to log into that mass-produced game again. Mary reassured him that posting through the status window would be much simpler. Following her advice, he posted a query asking if anyone knew how to repair an item like his, offering a hefty payment for the information. Despite that, he decided the broken item wasn't his immediate priority, as his current focus lay on the items he had recently purchased. Thanks to the 10 billion won he'd gotten from Kang Yong-seok, he had indulged in some interesting shopping. He confidently remarked that the Cavalry Guild's initiation ceremony shouldn't be a problem. However, Miri noticed that all the items he'd chosen had holy attributes and questioned why he'd chosen such items, especially since he was trying to join a dark magic guild. The protagonist smirked and explained that Miri didn't know everything, saying the initiation test would likely involve a necromancy duel where he'd have to defeat a summoned monster. Holy items would be the best choice for this situation. Miri argued that cursed items might have been more appropriate for a necromantic duel, as using holy items would be against the rules. The protagonist simply told her to relax and watch how he handled it. The scene shifted to the Cavalry Guild. The guild leader welcomed the protagonist, stating they had been expecting him. Apologizing for arriving later than planned, the protagonist was informed that the preparations for the duel were already complete, and that he had arrived just in time. Curious, the protagonist asked if special arrangements had been made. The guild leader confirmed, explaining that his initiation ceremony would involve a duel against the guild's vice leader, Jo Young-tae, to demonstrate his necromantic skills. Anticipation ran high among the guild members, who had even prepared a special venue for the duel. As the protagonist entered the arena surrounded by a crowd of guild members, he noticed the vice leader waiting in the center. However, what truly caught his attention was that everyone around him was bald. Even Miri couldn't help but complain about the blinding reflection from all the shiny heads. The protagonist quickly realized they were deliberately trying to provoke him. They knew he was only a B-rank hunter and couldn't use necromancy effectively. Their plan was clear: to humiliate him in front of everyone. He cursed himself for not anticipating this earlier, realizing the guild members were even worse than he had expected. Mary, still puzzled, asked why everyone was bald. The protagonist explained that people who use necromancy often suffer from hair loss as a side effect of the black mamba attribute. Alarmed, Mary asked if the protagonist would also lose his hair, but he didn't respond. The vice leader, Jo Young-tae, finally addressed Taejin, asking if he understood the duel's terms. He explained that they would battle exclusively using necromancy. Taejin confirmed confirmed, agreeing to use only necromancy. The terms dictated that if Taejun won, he would be allowed to join the guild under the agreed conditions. However, if he lost, he would be bound to serve the guild for the rest of his life. The protagonist, having anticipated such conditions, wasn't surprised. He was well aware that the vice leader effectively controlled the guild's finances and operations. Taejun believed Joyoung Ta was the reason the guild was in decline, his parasitic leadership dragging one of the oldest guilds into ruin. Despite this, Taejun confidently proposed an additional condition. If he won, he would take Joyoung Tae's position as vice leader and force him to compensate for the financial damage he'd caused. Smirking, he added that this would make the duel far more entertaining for the audience. He asked if Joyoung Ta was interested. Joyoung Ta, visibly annoyed, dismissed the accusations, claiming the cavalry guild's survival was entirely thanks to his efforts. To prove his worth, he slammed his staff to the ground, summoning an A-rank Death Knight. He challenged Taejun to show what he had prepared. Unfazed, Taejun began the duel by summoning Aratus. The crowd watched curiously as a skeletal warrior materialized, clad in the holy items Taejun had purchased from the market. But instead of impressing them, this drew mockery. The spectators laughed, questioning if he really thought a single skeleton could stand against the Death Knight. Joyoung Ta joined in, calling Taejun's preparation a joke. Ignoring the ridicule, Taejun commanded Aratus to attack. With a single blow, the Death Knight's armor cracked, stunning Joyoung Ta, who hadn't expected such power. The protagonist grinned, reveling in his opponent's shock. He asked Aratus if he liked his new equipment, and the skeleton humbly admitted that it was indeed incredible, though he still felt a little guilty wielding holy items. Taejun reassured him, insisting it didn't matter as long as he crushed the enemy. The crowd gasped, realizing that the skeleton had a holy attribute. Someone muttered in disbelief, questioning if such a thing was even possible. Taejun, meanwhile, internally explained the dynamics of mana attributes, detailing how fire, earth, wind, and water countered each other in sequence, while light and darkness opposed each other equally. Aratus, originally possessing a dark attribute, had undergone an evolution after consuming magical potions and battling alongside Taejun, becoming the only skeleton capable of wielding a divine attribute. As the duel continued, Taejun commanded Aratus to deliver the final blow. Aratus hesitated, asking if he should use that, to which Taejun nodded. Aratus began reciting, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the spirit of God was hovering over the waters." Joyoung Ta, confused by the skeleton's monologue, sneered at the absurdity, but Taejun pulled out a light grenade, and as Aratus concluded, and God said, "Let there be light," the grenade flew toward the Death Knight. In the midst of this white explosion, everyone tried to shield their eyes, questioning what on earth this light could be. It seemed to purify even their souls, leaving them to wonder especially about that skeleton, practically self-destructing, while wielding something with such terrifying power. In the end, the protagonist declared the fight over, with the Death Knight completely disintegrated and their stalwart skeleton still standing in the arena. The protagonist noticed that Aratus wasn't entirely immune to divine power, but the damage he sustained was minimal compared to what it could have been. The bald man complained that things hadn't gone according to his plan, while the protagonist demanded that he keep his promise, relinquish his position as vice leader of the guild, and repay everything he had taken, including everything he consumed from the Ancients Guild up to now. Everyone was confused, but the protagonist had clearly won. They started to see him as just another dictator like the rest. The bald man began lamenting, saying that if he'd only had a little more time, he could have completed his plans. It was then revealed that he had orchestrated the entire situation, telling Ba Hyun-soo about the Lich's relic and instructing him to approach the guild leader feigning ignorance. He had even recorded everything, planning to use the evidence to blackmail the guild leader and seize full control. But thanks to the protagonist, everything had fallen apart. Furious, the bald man said he wouldn't go down alone and pulled out a black heart, challenging the protagonist. The members of the guild recognized the item immediately. It was the heart of a cursed king, a completely forbidden artifact. The guild leader demanded to know what Young Ta was trying to do, but he simply squeezed the heart, declaring that they'd all died together. The protagonist used his ability to inspect the item and discover it was a suicide weapon. The artifact, created by an ancient forbidden evil, drained the mana and life force of its user to summon a cursed monster from another dimension. Young Ta warned the protagonist not to think he could take someone's opportunity and walk away unscathed. If he was going to lose everything, he wouldn't lose alone. As he stepped into a portal, a creature began to emerge. The monster that emerged was called the Bride of the Black Death. Everyone was struck with terror at its appearance and immediately started shouting for others to flee. The creature screamed, releasing a horrifying aura. Thankfully, the protagonist's system notification protected him from the Ancestor's Wail ability. The monster wasted no time unleashing a barrage of high-rank attacks. Its sheer power was unfathomable. Out of nowhere, someone who looked like they stepped straight out of JoJo's bizarre adventure appeared behind the protagonist, offering assistance. This was the Bone King, Lord Gushin, the former leader of the Cavalry Guild. The protagonist asked when he had arrived, but Gushin revealed he had been there the entire time. He couldn't miss an initiation ceremony that honored the guild's name. Besides, he'd enjoyed the show, complimenting the skeleton Aratus, who seemed far more conscious and aware than an ordinary skeleton, more like a lich. The protagonist, visibly nervous, worried that Gushin had figured out the truth. However, the old man assured him they could discuss it later. For now, they needed to deal with the summoned spirit before things got out of hand. Gushin launched several blood blades at the creature, binding it while piercing his body. Despite the onslaught, the monster screamed and continued to resist. Gushin, realizing its resilience, noted that such defiance was to be expected from a demon summoned at the cost of a life. To test its true strength, he raised his hand and caused an explosion of blood from within the creature. The protagonist watched in awe at the incredible destructive power of Gushin's legendary blood magic. Gushin, known as the Necromancer, who ruled the world for nearly 20 years after the Great Cataclysm, was a master of the mysterious blood magic. His team had once been renowned, and his leadership had elevated the guild to 3rd place in the national rankings. Although retired and largely forgotten now, his legacy was formidable. However, blood magic came at a cost. It used the caster's own blood as a medium. This weakness became apparent as Gushin began coughing up blood. Fighting a cursed creature that could infect with a mere touch was particularly disadvantageous, as close combat was out of the question. With no mana left after using his signature attack, the protagonist couldn't rely on his rising dragon technique. The cursed creature charged toward him, leaping with its double-footed assault. Its heels struck with such force they cracked the very ground. Just as the creature bore down on the protagonist, Erethus intervened, shielding his master while proclaiming in the name of the light and the Holy Spirit that the monster would not be forgiven. The protagonist demanded to know where Erethus had been, as he had nearly died. Erethus explained that the divine light from the earlier battle had briefly rendered him unconscious, but he was back now and would protect his master. The protagonist and Mary noticed a distinct change in Erethus' personality, with Mary even questioning why he seemed so different. The protagonist had no answers. Erethus charged at the creature, shouting that it would be purified by sacred light. However, the creature grabbed his head and burned him with purple flames. The protagonist realized that even divine power was ineffective against the monster, leaving him to wonder how they could possibly defeat it. Erethus, his voice resolute, told the protagonist that this was where his journey ended. He asked only that the protagonist survive. Teijin questioned what Erethus was planning. The skeleton, now resolute, drew a strange sword. The protagonist shouted for him to stop, knowing what would happen if he used that item. It was a one-time use artifact that had cost a staggering 8 billion. He couldn't afford to lose Erethus, no matter the cost. Then the skeleton finished the attack. The Saints gained ranked S. While Teijin cried, the old man said that a real skeleton was incredible. Not only did it use sacred attribute items, but it could also wield a holy sword. After the smoke cleared, the system announced that he had defeated Priest Blatch, and the summoned creature Erethus had its durability increased. While Teijin fought with the skeleton, it only turned around apologizing to its master, stating this was just to protect him. The system returned, stating that he had entered a petrification state for 24 hours, while Teijin kept talking to himself, complaining that he hadn't said anything. He thought of the legendary item, the Sacred King's Star Cluster. Even considering the severe debuff, its power was extremely strong, surpassing the common sense of this world. The problem was that recharging this energy cost an astronomical amount of sacred power, so he grew sad, saying that at this point he could buy a new one. But his partner told him there was a reason it was so expensive. He placed his hand on the skeleton, saying it had done a good job. At first he thought it was just a normal skeleton, but in truth, it was determination itself. And so a tear fell from the petrified skeleton. The old man arrived, saying the poor skeleton was trapped in a debuff, while Teijin asked if it was okay. Lord Gushin asked if he needed to take any action, but what Teijin wanted was for him to release the summon and let it rest for a while. So he bowed his head, saying he understood. Then he remarked that it was the first time he had ever seen something like this, a skeleton wielding a sacred object. But in the end, that sight was like witnessing the heroes of the past. Teijin looked at it, thinking that in the end, it was just a skeleton. The Lord went back to thanking him, saying that no matter what his intentions had been, the power of Hwariang had escaped from Zhou Yangte's grasp. He had stopped the one who had been planning to betray both him and his nephew from within the position of Vice Guild leader. Then he looked at him, saying that Teijin's goal wasn't so different from his own, and he asked if anything useful had been left in Hwariang. Teijin just smiled, thinking that the experience couldn't be underestimated, because this old man seemed to know from the very beginning. But the reason he had joined the guild was only for his own benefit. That's why he wanted to be only the vice leader, not the leader. However, he had no intention of taking anything away from others. He then said that the guild had value to him. The old man thought that was good. Then he shouted, calling everyone, and declared that through this duel, Teijin's abilities had been proven. He had not only defeated Zhou Yang in necromancy, but also defeated the evil spirit and saved everyone's lives. Therefore, he ordered that from now on, this man would be the vice leader of the Hwariang Guild. Then he passed the word to him to say something to everyone, but the fool didn't even know where to start a speech. So he simply introduced himself as Teijin and said only one thing: let's not steal each other's rice bowls. That was his whole speech. Later, in the Myth Guild, they were watching the news that Teijin had become vice leader. One man looked on, thinking he had never imagined Teijin would join that guild. Although he respected the choice, he felt betrayed. Another woman complained that he was careless and kept losing talented people. He acted dramatic, saying his sister was being too harsh with him. But she was angry because she should have brought Teijin into her guild, since people like him were hard to find. Besides, she didn't understand why he had joined that guild at all. She remembered that Shana was close to Teijin, so she thought about asking her. In the end, she even tried to bribe the protagonist to come to her guild. She came back asking if they weren't close, but Sien replied that they were, but she had no idea what he was thinking. The woman just smiled back, while Sien continued, saying that sometimes she didn't know what went on in his head. Even though they had been friends for 10 years, Teijin could be very unpredictable. But one thing she was sure of: he always wanted to get stronger, and so everyone cheered for the new vice leader. A bald man asked to guide him to the office, while Teijin was left speechless. After leaving him in the office, the bald man bowed, wishing him good work. But Teijin was exhausted from so much formality, wondering if every place was like this. His partner said that each guild was different. She turned to him, asking how he felt on his first day as a guild vice leader. He replied that it wasn't so good right now, but he was beginning to wonder if this was really what he wanted. Teijin shook his head, saying that successful people were lonely. He had been chasing what was in front of him all the time, paying for the hardships he endured over the last 7 years, completing missions and growing. So he wondered if it was right to get stronger so fast, because he had an uneasy feeling. Teijin returned to the manager, saying he had questions. She said that the developer of the dramatic growth had left the company. She confirmed it. He asked if that meant that if he failed a mission, there would be no penalty, because there had to be some drawback. She replied that she wasn't sure, so she would check the servers. Taejin thought to himself that he didn't really understand these managerial things. From the beginning, it had been strange that he was the only one using a status window that didn't even exist on Earth. He had been receiving benefits up until now, so he couldn't keep using it without knowing anything. At that moment, the manager came out shouting emergency. Taejin asked what had happened, but she said she had received some information. He tried to find out what it was while she began reading from the system. It said in the system user's guide that upon receiving dramatic growth, users could receive missions. These missions were calculated based on the user's situation, and if they were not completed within the time limit, the effects of growth would be invalidated. This shocked Taejin, who asked why, since everything he had gained so far could disappear. She agreed, saying that's how it was written. He fumed like a dragon, asking how she hadn't told him something this important earlier, but she apologized, saying she didn't know and had stolen this secret information. Since this subject was super secret, she had no access to it. All she knew was the matter of special priority. At that moment, she covered her mouth, saying she shouldn't have said that. Taejin thought all of this was strange, spending the whole day just to explain the latest functions. It felt like a game operator was running a balance patch test. So he asked if the manager was here to monitor his life. He got closer, ordering her not to lie. Sadly, she said it wasn't something she could reveal now. Then he joked, saying that in the end she didn't know anything. But she came back confidently, saying that she was always on Taejin's side. Hey everyone, did you enjoy the story? I really liked it. If you want to follow the next part, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next story, guys.